The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Naomi Klein's brilliant new book, This Changes Everything. This from the introduction. A voice came over the intercom. Would the passengers of Flight 3935, scheduled to depart Washington, D.C. for Charleston, South Carolina, kindly collect their carry-on luggage and get off the plane? They went down the stairs and gathered on the hot tarmac. Then they saw something unusual. The wheels of the U.S. Airways jet had sunk into the black pavement as if it was wet cement. The wheels were lodged so deep, in fact, that the truck that came to tow the plane away couldn't pry out loose. The airline had hoped that without the added weight of the plane's 35 passengers, the aircraft would be light enough to pull. It wasn't. Someone posted a picture. Why is my flight canceled? Because D.C. is so damn hot that our planes sank 4 inches into the pavement. Eventually, a larger, more powerful vehicle was brought in to tow the plane, and this time it worked. The plane finally took off 3 hours behind schedule. The spokesperson for the airline blamed the incident on very unusual temperatures. The temperatures in the summer of 2012 were indeed unusually hot, as they were the year before and the year before, and it's no mystery why this has been happening. The profligate burning of fossil fuels, the very thing that U.S. Airways was bound and determined to do, despite the inconvenience presented by a melting tarmac. This irony, the fact that the burning of fossil fuels is so radically changing our climate that it's getting in the way of our capacity to burn fossil fuels, did not stop the passengers of Flight 3935 from re-embarking and continuing their journeys. Nor was climate change mentioned in any of the major news coverage of the incident. I'm in no position to judge these passengers. All of us who live high consumer lifestyles, wherever we may happen to reside, are metaphorically passengers on Flight 3935. Faced with a crisis that threatens our survival as a species, our entire culture is continuing to do the very thing that caused the crisis, only with an extra dose of elbow grease behind it. Like the airline bringing in a truck with a more powerful engine to tow that plane, the global economy is upping the ante from conventional sources of fossil fuels to even dirtier and more dangerous versions. Bitumen from the Alberta tar sands, oil from deepwater drilling, gas from hydraulic fracking, coal from detonated mountains, and so on. Meanwhile, each supercharged natural disaster produces new irony-laden snapshots of a climate increasingly inhospitable to the very industries most responsible for its warming, like the 2013 historic floods in Calgary that forced the head offices of the oil companies mining the Alberta tar sands to go dark and send their employees home, while a train carrying flammable petroleum products teetered on the edge of a disintegrating rail bridge. Or the drought that hit the Mississippi River 1 year earlier, pushing water levels so low that barges loaded with coal and oil were unable to move for days while they waited for the Army Corps of Engineers to dredge a channel. They had to appropriate funds allocated to rebuild from the previous year's historic flooding along the same waterway. Or the coal-fired power plants in other parts of the country that were temporarily shut down because the waterways that they draw into cooler machinery were either too hot or too dry, or in some cases, both. Living with this kind of cognitive dissonance is simply part of being alive in this jarring moment of history, when a crisis that we have been studying, studiously ignoring, is hitting us in the face. And yet we're doubling down on the stuff that caused the crisis in the first place. I denied climate change for longer than I care to admit. I knew it was happening, sure, and not like Donald Trump and the Tea Party years going on about how the continued existence of winter proves it's all a hoax. But I stayed pretty hazy on the details and only skimmed most of the news stories, especially the really scary ones. I told myself the science was too complicated and that the environmentalists, they're dealing with it. And I continue to behave as if there was nothing wrong with the shiny card in my wallet attesting to my elite frequent flyer status. A great many of us engage in this kind of climate change denial. We look for a split second and then we look away. Or we look but then turn it into a joke. More signs of the apocalypse, which is another way of looking away. Or we look but tell ourselves comforting stories about how humans are clever and will come up with a technological miracle that will safely suck the carbon out of the skies or magically turn down the heat of the sun, which I was to discover while researching this book is yet another way of looking away. Or we try to look, we look but try to be hyper-rational about it. Dollar for dollar, it's more efficient to focus on economic development than climate change, since wealth is the best protection from climate extremes, weather extremes. As if having a few more dollars will make much difference when your city is underwater, which is a way of looking away if you happen to be a policy wonk. Or we look but tell ourselves we're too busy to care about something so distant and abstract, even though we saw the water in the subways in New York City and the people on the rooftops in New Orleans, and know that no one is safe, the most vulnerable least of all. And though perfectly understandable, this too is a way of looking away. Or we look but tell ourselves that all we can do is focus on ourselves, meditate and shop at farmers markets and stop driving, but forget trying to actually change the systems that are making the crisis inevitable, because that's too much bad energy and it'll never work. And at first it may appear as if we are looking, because many of these lifestyle changes are indeed part of the solution, but we still have one eye tightly shut. Or maybe we look, really look, but then inevitably we seem to forget. Remember and then forget again. Climate change is like that. It's hard to keep in your head for very long. We engage in this odd form of on-again, off-again ecological amnesia for perfectly rational reasons. We deny it because we fear that letting in the full reality of this crisis will change everything. And we are right. And the book is This Changes Everything by Naomi Klein.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Wow. So the Republicans yesterday passed their tax bill. Donald Trump is not going to be able to sign it, apparently, until after the first of the year, because the tax bill will provoke an immediate 4% cut in Medicare and a huge cut in Medicaid. In fact, the Republicans in their legislation 3 weeks ago authorized a $1 billion cut, a $1 trillion cut. No, it's let me find the exact numbers here. We'll get to these, but there's going to be a huge cut in Medicare and Medicaid, 4% to Medicare. I know that amount, 4% per year to Medicare, unless they pass a spending bill that specifically says, no, don't do the cut this year. But that's going to have to reverse sequestration. It's just a whole big mess. But in the meantime, you know, the news that's all over Trump TV, they're calling it nowadays, I call it Fox so-called news, and the right-wing hate machine, the right-wing hate radio, you know, well-funded, well-greased machine out there, is that AT&T is giving, you know, 200,000 workers a $1,000 bonus, and Comcast is giving 100,000 workers a $1,000 bonus. And isn't that amazing? Isn't that like the fulfillment of the president's promise? If we give trillions of dollars, specifically $5 trillion to rich people in these big corporations, they'll give a few $100 million to you peons. And it's happening. Now, it could be that the reason why AT&T is praising Trump and passing out a $1,000 bonus check to a couple 100,000 employees could be that they've got this merger with Time Warner in front of the Trump administration, and Donald Trump is trying to blow it up because he's unhappy with CNN. But maybe if AT&T can make him look good enough, he'll go for it, right? Amazing. Wells Fargo says they're going to raise their minimum wage to $15 an hour. Wells Fargo was one of the banks that it was announced yesterday that Goldman Sachs announced yesterday. The 7 big banks are going to see an average 14% increase in profitability. These are banks that are generating profit on the order of, $5 to $10 billion per year. So yeah, we'll give a few $1,000,000 to our employees. Thank you for the billions and billions of dollars. But the really insane thing is where all this money is coming from. All this money is coming. We had a Republican shill yesterday call into the program. Whenever there's a consequential piece of legislation, I'm convinced these people are not even regular listeners or viewers to the program. They just get the memo from someplace and, oh yeah, call in, get this meme out there. It's really important. Positive train control doesn't work. I'm going to make $2,000 on the tax bill. It was amazing. I mean, yesterday was just filled with them. And I was thinking last night, the guy who said, I'm retired and I'm going to have a $2,000 tax saving. Well, first of all, he was obviously lying. If you're making $130,000 a year, you're not retired. Number two, where is that $2,000 that he's going to get at his tax break coming from? Where is it coming from? In Arizona, 118,000 children are going to lose their health insurance from the CHIP program. 3,200 in Arizona. It's 118,000 in California. 3,000 kids are going to lose their CHIP program subsidies in Arizona. 85,000 under the Medicaid expansion. California, 1.9 million could lose their coverage under the Medicaid expansion. This is part of Obamacare, which Trump last night bragged that he finally gutted. Remember, it was repeal and replace? There's no replacement. It's just, let's gut Obamacare. All of our health insurance rates are going to go up at least 10%, according to the actuaries. And over 10 million people are going to lose their health insurance because of this legislation that was passed yesterday. People are going to die. And I got people calling my program going, hey, I got my $2,000. Screw the people who are going to die. To hell with the kids. Colorado, 76,000 kids on the CHIP program. Connecticut, 25,000 kids on the CHIP program. Delaware, 17,000 kids on the CHIP program. Florida, 201,000 kids on the CHIP program. Congress has not reauthorized this. Got to have the money for tax cuts for billionaires. That's the first priority, New York, 424,000 people on the CHIP program, on the Children's Health Insurance Program. These are all states that are going to lose their money between January and February of next year. Arizona, California, Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, D.C., Florida, Georgia, Hawaii, Idaho, Kansas, Kentucky, Louisiana, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Montana, Nevada, New York, Oregon, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, Utah, Virginia, Washington. And then with shortfalls after 2018, you add Alabama, Alaska, Iowa, Maryland, Mississippi, Missouri, Oklahoma, Texas, and Vermont. The total is going to be 7,218,000 people are going to lose their health insurance. Of them, 2.8 million are children under the Children's Health Insurance Program, and 4.3 million are people who are on Medicaid, which could include your grandma in the nursing home, or your disabled nephew, or whatever. I mean, this is, and by the way, these numbers are not from some weird left wing. This is from the Georgetown University Health Policy Institute, the Center for Children and Families, and they just produced this PDF, this report that shows what's going on. Meanwhile, the companies, yeah, they're going to pass out a few $1,000,000 to their employees, nice PR, and they'll get lots of goodies and benefits from the Trump administration in exchange for that. But what are they going to do with all the extra money that they're going to get? These are companies that have already announced their plans for next year in anticipation of this tax bill. This is just over the last couple months. On the 6th of December, for example, Home Depot announced that they are going to buy back $15 billion worth of their own shares. $15 billion. Now, it used to be illegal for companies to buy their own shares. This law ended under Reagan. It used to be illegal, so companies could not play games with their share prices. I've explained this before, and if you've heard before, my apologies if I'm redundant, but there's constantly new people listening. Here's how it works. Let's say you've got a company, and we'll use just really, really simple numbers. Let's say that I own a company that has 100 shares, and my company is worth $100,000. So each share is worth $1,000. And let's say that out of those 100 shares, I own half of them. So my company is worth $100,000. My stock is worth $50,000 because there's 100 shares and I own 50 of those shares. Now, what happens if my company buys back the other 50 shares that are out there in the public being held by Sean and Nate and whoever, or whatever, people owning shares in the company? What happens when the company buys them back? Those shares go away. So now my $100,000 company, which used to be represented with 100 shares worth $1,000 each, is now represented by 50 shares, which are worth $2,000 each. So all the stock that I own just doubled in value because my company bought back the shares. So share buybacks don't do anything for the economy. They don't do anything for working people. They don't do anything for the company. They only benefit the stockholders and the CEOs and senior executives who are compensated with stock options. Home Depot says they're going to buy back $15 billion worth of shares. Oracle, $12 billion. Honeywell, $6.5 billion. Pfizer, $10 billion. Bank of America, $5 billion. Anthem, $5 billion. Boeing, $4 billion. MasterCard, $4 billion. United Airlines, $3 billion. On it goes.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is the biggest theft from the American people, certainly of my lifetime. This is absolutely mind-boggling. And welcome back. Kathy, watching Free Speech TV in Halifax, Pennsylvania. Hey, Kathy, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I just wanted to call into the show and make you and your listeners aware that that's $1,000 to AT&T was a settlement that was reached, according to the CWA union website, June 5th, I think, of 2017.
Yes, although it only applied to 20,000 workers, and they're expanding it to 200,000 workers. But yes, you're right. This is something that was negotiated with the union last year.
As far as I can tell from Twitter and the other websites, it's, again, Trump trying to take credit for, things that other people did.
Yeah, although, as I said, the company expanded what they had already negotiated with the CWA, with the Communication Workers of America, with their union. They expanded it somewhat. So, there's a little bit of, I suppose, credit, if you want to call it credit. But I'm just, last night it just hit me. It's like, when that guy called in bragging about his tax cut, I was basically trying to challenge him. Are you really getting that amount of money? And what I should have been saying is, do you really want to take that money if you know that it means that some child with leukemia is going to die?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's like I was sort of making a joke yesterday about, well, maybe I should turn my company into a pass-through entity, but do I really want to take that money if it means that, 1,000 children in West Virginia are not going to have health care?
Yeah.
And, I think the answer...
Anybody with a conscience, the answer would be no.
Right, but the problem is that, we all live in the real world, and if I don't take that tax deduction, somebody else is going to. I mean, that's the rationalization everybody's going to use.
Yeah.
These are not problems at the levels of the individual. These are problems at the level of structure, and we really, really need to be taking it on. Kathy, thank you for the call. Very well said. Thank you. Rick in Weston, West Virginia. Hey, Rick, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, you know what I think we're witnessing? I think we're witnessing a corporate coup in cahoots with the Republicans, the right-wing billionaire class, and the major corporations.
I absolutely agree with you, Rick. I wrote a book about this called The Crash of 2016, and it's literally, the entire book is about that corporate coup that started in 1971 that reached its peak just in the last couple of years, yes.
Yeah, it's come to head, and I'll tell you another thing, too. They're giving, they're going to double down, getting the middle class, some extra money. That's only to get the dollars on their side. Hitler pulled this stuff in Germany in the early 30s, and look what it got them. See, the whole thing is critical thinking is not even taught in our schools anymore, and so many young people, they buy into this nonsense.
Yeah. Well, it's not just young people. I mean, the largest cohort of people right now who believe the BS that's out there coming from the Trump administration are people over 60 who watch Fox News.
Well, I'm over 60, and I don't watch Fox News because I do just to hear what the enemy's thinking, and Rush Limbaugh's another one.
Yeah.
But, people have got to really start paying attention.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's amazing that a network, Fox News, owned by a billionaire and programmed by multimillionaires, or Rush Limbaugh, a guy whose last contract was for $400 million, that these guys are giving...
He's got his own private army from right here, too.
Right. These guys are giving middle-class Americans advice on how they should be voting, and it's like, really? Rick, thanks for the call, and thanks for watching us there in West Virginia. We'll be right back. Stick around.
This year's election results have generated fear, sadness, and despair.
In the days and months ahead,
our democracy may face a crisis of historic proportions.
But there is good news.
There is good news.
There is good news. Thousands of people are stepping forward in solidarity, resistance,
and resolve.
We join them.
We join them.
We join them.
In standing with the most vulnerable communities among us.
Those most likely to be targeted by new restrictions and policies.
We will tell their stories here.
Here.
Here on Free Speech TV.
We will lift their voices here.
Here on Free Speech TV.
In the difficult times ahead, know that we will be with you
24 hours a day.
Every day.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
There are millions of us.
Raising our voices and hearts together as one.
We've got your back.
We got your back.
Free Speech TV's got your back.
The revolution is in progress.
I'm Nina Turner, and you're watching Free Speech TV.
The tax bill rolls on. The tax scam rolls on. We are watching our country be deconstructed. This is, Steve Bannon said his goal was the deconstruction of the administrative state. That is what you are watching. Ultimately, the goal of the Republicans here is to end Medicare, end Medicaid, and end Social Security. Move all these things, privatize all three of these programs. The reason that banksters like Pete Peterson have been screaming for years about the national deficit is they also want to end the Treasury Department's practice of issuing bonds. They want only banks to be able to do that so that they can make the money on your savings or on anybody's savings, pension funds, universities, whatever it may be. So the list of horribles, the list of terribles here is rather substantial. Today is the winter solstice. It's the shortest day of the year. And I remember when we lived in Germany, I learned this. The Christmas of 1986, we went up in the forest near Steinach, and Herr Mueller and some friends of his had gone out and they'd found this giant tree and they'd fastened all these little candles in it, real candles, in this, with little glass globes and things. They were relatively fireproof. And, it just lit this tree up, and one of the kids from the Salem Children's Village was out playing the trumpet, and there were some animals. There were horses and goats and dogs. And we walked out to this tree in the early evening dark and This little kid played the trumpet, Silent Night, and Herr Mueller read a Bible verse. It was so beautiful. And but the story that I learned was that the shortest day of the year is more or less right around Christmas. And so back, a couple thousand years ago in that part of the world, which is where many of these traditions originated, because it was the shortest day of the year, particularly the farther north you go, the shorter the days are, right? So you get up to like Northern Europe, and it was really short days, just like in Alaska right now. I mean, just a few hours of daylight during the day, darkness for hours and hours. And so the people were pretty worried about this. What's going to happen? Is the sun going out? And so, but the priests, they had built these like Stonehenge-like structures, sometimes very big ones, sometimes fairly small ones. I mean, there's over 200 of them that we know of just in the northeastern United States that are Neolithic, that are, predate Columbus or even Leif Erikson. So, so the priests knew when the solstice was coming, the winter and the summer solstice. And so they knew today was the shortest day of the year. So they'd find this tree, the tallest tree on the top of the biggest mountain, and they would go up and they would just light that tree on fire. And as the tree is burning, the priest would say, "Sun, ignite!" And, call for the sun to catch back on fire and return its heat to the earth. And the next day, the day would be a little bit longer. And the day after that, the day would be a little bit longer. And the day after that, the day would be a little bit longer. And within a week or two, it's fairly obvious the days were getting longer, and the people would look at the priest and go, "He did it again." So here we are. Happy winter solstice. So there's that. There's all that stuff. There's a lot going on, too. John in Fredericksburg, Virginia, you wanted to comment on the tax bill. John, what's on your mind today?
Yes. We shouldn't allow the Republicans to be over-elated because they passed the tax bill. If that bill was so great, Trump would sign it today. But because if he signs it today or before the end of the year, it would trigger a cut. Therefore, the cut would juxtapose to the giveaway of the corporations. And I don't think the Democrats should allow them to get away with that.
Yeah.
They should not allow him.
Democrats don't have any control over it, John.
No. I'm not talking about that. They should not allow him to go or his surrogates to go on TV to declare it a victory.
Yeah. Well, Democrats are doing their very best to point out the BS in this bill, but
I know, but that would prove it.
Yeah, prove it to whom? I mean, that's the problem.
No. Prove it to the American public that if he signs it today, every person would feel it today.
Right. Well, there would be an automatic 4% cut to Medicare.
He's waiting until the next year to sign it, therefore you don't feel the full effect until 19.
Right. Yeah. Because if he signed it today, there would be an immediate 4% cut in Medicare, and among other programs. So that's the most conspicuous. And again, this idiot who called me yesterday and said, "I'm really happy. I'm going to make $2,000 extra next year." And I'm like, "Yeah, and you're retired? Your Medicare is going to cost more, or is it going to go away? Really?" Yeah, John.
But if that person will call back today, ask him how he would feel if Trump signs it today, and because he got his $2,000, he would feel the cut on the other side, and he wouldn't really feel that $2,000.
Yep. Yeah, this is a $5 trillion transfer of wealth to the top 1%. $3.5 trillion of it is coming out of your pocket and mine, John, and $1.5 trillion of it is being put on the national credit card. It is obscene, and the fact that the news media
but the Democrats need to express that the reason why he didn't do it today is because that would prove that tax cut is really hurting the people.
Yeah, no, I got it, absolutely, John. And again, our media is just like so eager to give these guys a pass because they don't want to offend the Republicans because they need them to show up on their Sunday shows.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
This is what happens when the only goal of media is to produce a profit, when they've forgotten about the goal of actually reporting the news. We'll be back.
We're reading today in the Thom Hartmann University Book Club from Threshold, the progressive plan to pull America back from the brink. This is chapter 3, page 53. It's titled Population. Sometime between mid-2007 and mid-2008, China exceeded the United States as the single largest emitter of carbon dioxide, dumping an estimated 7 billion tons of CO2 into the atmosphere per year in 2008, compared with the U.S. estimated 6.2 billion tons that year. But China is a vast and populous country. On a per-person basis, Americans are still the most profligate producers of carbon dioxide, with the average American in 2008 directly responsible for around 19.4 tons of greenhouse gas, not to mention the portion of China's emissions that went to make products shipped to and consumed by Americans. Russia, with its less than modern industrial infrastructure, comes in second at around 11.8 tons per person. It's a cold country, and few homes are truly winterized. Then the European Union at 8.6 tons per person, and China at 5.1 tons per person. India, which is rapidly industrializing, is still one of the most efficient per-person nations in the world at 1.8 tons of CO2 per person per year. Although that's because much of the country is so poor they don't have cars, the winters don't require much heat except in the extreme north, and the focus of India's industrialization has been digital rather than manufacturing. The largest driver of all these processes that are tearing our planet apart and putting all life at risk is the increase in human biomass. There are roughly 1 trillion pounds of human flesh on the planet right now, and assuming a worldwide average food consumption of around 3 pounds per person, in the U.S. it's almost 5 per day, we're consuming around 7 trillion pounds of food per year. One result of this is that over half of the entire net productive capacity of the planet, the entire planet's ability to produce edible products from photosynthesis, is now used up, displaced, or wiped out by humans, leaving every other life form on Earth to compete for the leftovers. Our population growth has not been particularly even. In the first 100,000 years of human history, we averaged around 20 to 50 million people total. 60,000 or so years ago, as we moved out of Africa and began to cover the world, we crept up to a few hundred million by the time of Christ, 2,000 years ago. Around the time of the Crusades, when the world was, by most definitions, pretty well populated, we were coming into conflict with each other all over the world. There were only 500 million of us on the entire planet. Not long after the American Revolution, we hit our first billion humans on planet Earth in 1800. The second billion didn't take 165,000 years. We doubled our population in just 130 years, hitting 2 billion in 1930, just as the United States was sliding into the Republican Great Depression. But that economic debacle didn't slow the growth of human numbers. By the year JFK was sworn in, just 30 years later, the planet had added another billion humans. The growth in population was driven largely by cheap, abundant oil and fertilizer and pesticides made from it, the farm and transportation equipment fueled by it, and the processing, packaging, and distribution system made possible by oil that lets a person in Iowa have a lunch of tilapia fish grown in ponds in China, lettuce and tomatoes grown in Mexico, wine imported from France, and a fruit cup of berries imported from Chile and strawberries from Nicaragua. In this environment of relatively abundant food, even in the third world, our 4th billion took us only 14 years to add, 1974. Our 5th billion only 13 years, 1987. And our 6th billion only 12 years, 1999. As oil became more expensive, raising the price of food indirectly, since most of us are actually eating oil, population growth first began to slow in the first decade of the 21st century. Part of this was attributable to birth rate declines in developed countries, part to an explosion in the death rates because of TB and AIDS in the third world, part to famine and associated diseases in sub-Saharan Africa as deserts moved south due to global warming. But while growth is slowing, we're still adding people at a rate many times faster than just 3 centuries ago. Topsoil all over the world is vanishing. Transportation is becoming exponentially more expensive. And as human population density increasingly resembles the inside of a petri dish, diseases ranging from TB, more than 1 billion people are infected, and more die from that than any other cause worldwide, to AIDS, to the constantly mutating common cold and related corona and flu viruses, remember SARS, represent a menace that is dramatically amplified by the 1 trillion pounds of human flesh such diseases inhabit. We are not the first culture to reach this threshold of population versus resources. As I discussed at length later in this book, the Maori of New Zealand, a group of Polynesian explorers, are a prime example of a culture that, like the Europeans who discovered America, thought they had found a land of unlimited wealth and food, but ultimately learned that there is a limit to growth. the biosphere, and that when you unthinkingly hit that limit, life can become hellish and democracy nearly impossible. But the concept of a limit to growth, or a finite world, was largely unknown to the classical economists on whose assumptions, formulas, and work our modern economy is organized. In fact, the classical and neoclassical economists, from Malthus to Jean-Baptiste Say to Marx to Friedman, would suggest that the Maori hit the limit not of their biosphere, the ability of the land of New Zealand to produce food, but of their technology. They would correctly point out that today New Zealand houses several million more people than it did when that island nation was entirely populated by Maori. And modern technology has ensured that not only is there enough food, but that surplus agricultural land has been turned to a growing of fuel and medicinal crops. The book is Threshold.
Learn all about .com/podcast. They're commercial free and you can listen anytime, any place you want. The jury verdicts are coming in. This is the first trial of the J20 people, the people who were arrested the day that Trump was inaugurated in the vicinity of where a half a dozen or a dozen people were smashing windows. There were several hundred people who were kettled into this. 6 of them went on trial. They were charged, they were facing 42 charges, 60 to 70 years in prison, and they have been found innocent. It wasn't just the case was dismissed. The jury found them innocent on all counts. This is like really good news, number one. Number two, there's a new app out. It's called the Uni Probe. It is Uni is the Open Observatory of Network Interference, OONI. It's a group that is keeping track of how your and my internet service providers are messing with our internet in order to increase their profits. Now that we no longer have net neutrality, you know, how they might be censoring what we're watching, how they might be blocking some websites and speeding up others. This app, it's an open source nonprofit app that they just released, and it's for crowdsourcing net neutrality violations. And so there's an App Store version, there's a Google Play version, so you know, check it out. It's fascinating stuff. Greg in Spokane, Washington. Hey, Greg, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thank you so much for taking my call.
Sure. What's on your mind?
I heard you the other day when some guy came on and he said, Tom, tell me what the Democratic Party stands for.
Right.
And I've canvassed for Bernie and stuff like that, and I am a Democrat or independent. But your reply was that they stand for the working people. Well, I'm 61 years old, and I've heard that line and heard it, and I've seen Clinton, or not Hillary, but Bill Clinton sign the North American Free Trade. It kind of screwed us. Obama didn't put any banksters in jail. The situation's kind of the same.
Yeah. Greg, the situation is not the same. I am so sick of this circular firing squad. Oh my God, Obama wasn't perfect. Bill Clinton made some mistakes. Yes. So what? The fact of the matter is that you have a Secretary of Labor right now in the Trump administration who's openly hostile to working people. You had in the Bush administration, you have in the Trump administration, you had in the Reagan and the first Bush administrations, labor departments that actually worked against unions. You've got Republican parties in state after state. The most recent, I believe, was Wisconsin, where Scott Walker goes in, and then in Michigan, too, to break up not just unions, but public unions as well. You've got an active and aggressive campaign against working people that the Republican Party launched back in the 1920s, which led to the Roaring '20s and led to the Great Depression. And they have continued that war on working people ever since day one. So don't give me this damn BS about, oh, Clinton wasn't perfect and Obama wasn't perfect, and therefore there's no difference between Republicans and Democrats. You know it's nonsense. You know it's nonsense. Anyway. Enough of my rant. Mike in Cartersville, Georgia. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind today?
Oh, it's good to hear from you. When you talked about the president not signing the bill until after the first of the year, it got me to thinking about the pocket veto. The Constitution grants the president 10 days to review a measure passed by the Congress, and if the president doesn't sign the bill after 10 days, it becomes law without his signature. However, if Congress adjourns during the 10-day period, according to the Senate's definition of pocket veto, the bill does not become law. There's more than 10 days between the passage of the bill and January 2nd. If the president is not going to sign it, and there's more than 10 days, and the Congress adjourns, and they will adjourn for the holidays, does that mean we have to go through this whole charade of passing this thing through both houses again?
My guess would be, Mike, that the Senate parliamentarian and Harry Reid, you know, they know the rules better than anybody on earth, and that probably if everything you say is true, and this is new information for me, so I can't give you an informed comment, but this is a guess.
Yeah.
If everything you say is true, then all the Republicans have to do is what they did for the last 8 years throughout the Obama presidency, and that is simply refuse to recess.
And somebody gavel the session into...
Right. Just have some Republicans show up in the Senate every day for 3 minutes, bang it into session, bang it out of session.
Well, I got the definition from the glossary on Senate.gov for pocket veto.
Yeah.
So factual, I think, is the Senate rules.
Yeah, Mike, I think you're, you know, I understand, you know, your point, and I would love to participate in the wishful thinking on this, but I would guarantee, you know, I can't say with 100% certainty, but 99.5% certainty that if what you're saying is true, the Republicans have figured out a way around it. And if
but there's one other thing. If they don't adjourn, there'll still be 10 days passing, and the president's signature will not be required.
Right. In which case the signing ceremony is largely ceremonial because the bill is already law.
That's right.
And it was signed on the 20th, so 10 days from then becomes, what, the 2nd? Yeah, this January, no, 10 days would be the 30th. That's not even next year.
That's right.
Which means that the sequestration of Medicare goes into effect on December 31st.
That's right.
Well, that's interesting.
I mean, there's a procedural thing here in the Constitution that they've got to deal with.
What the 10 days? Where is that in the Constitution?
It's in the definition of pocket veto.
Oh, okay. So you're talking Senate rules. You're not talking the Constitution.
Well, no. The Constitution defines pocket veto. I'm looking at the Senate.
The Constitution does not. The phrase pocket veto does not exist in the Constitution.
No, but it is. The president has. It's not. It's described in the Constitution because the president has the power to hold the bill for 10 days.
Right. So again, where is that in the Constitution? I'd like to look it up, and I don't recall specifically where it might be.
Oh, I'm not looking directly at the Constitution myself. I'm looking at the Senate's definition, which says the Constitution grants the president 10 days. It's probably under the powers of the president.
You would guess, although the Article 1 also deals with the legislative process. So,
yeah, and I'm not sure which of the two it's under.
Yeah.
But the definition on Senate.gov says the Constitution grants the president 10 days to review a measure.
Yeah.
Congress.
Article 1, Section 7. Thank you, Nate.
Okay, thank you.
Article 1, Section 7. Let's check it out and see what it says. Section 7. All bills for raising revenue shall originate with the House of Representatives. Blah, blah, blah. Every bill after it's passed, but in some same signs it. Every shall be approved, yeah. If such a reconsideration, 2/3 of the House, in all such cases, shall be determined by yeas and nays. If any bill shall be returned by the president, actually, this is not if he fails to sign it, it's if he refuses to sign it. If any bill shall not be returned by the president that would be signed. If any bill shall not be returned by the president within 10 days, Sundays accepted. So there's presumably 2 Sundays between now and the end of the year, so that might just push it to January 1st. After it shall have been presented to him, the same shall be a law in like manner as if he had signed it, unless the Congress, by their adjournment, prevent its return, in which case it shall not be a law. So the easy, number one, if there's 2 Sundays and it's 12 days, now it becomes 10 days, and now you're at January 1st, number one. And number two, or maybe January 2nd. And number two, that's probably enough, right? But number two, you've got those Sundays in there, and B, I predict the Republicans are not going to adjourn the Congress. I just,
Yeah, you're probably right about that.
Yeah. So we'll see where it plays out, how it plays out, Mike. But great legal theory. Keep thinking. Mike, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Todd in Tempe, Arizona. Hey, Todd, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Hey, I'm a CEO of a corporation that sells both nationally and internationally, and I guess maybe I'm an alien on this planet. I've been railing that I don't want tax breaks. What spurs my company, what forces me, or willingly puts me in a position to expand and hire people, is demand.
Yeah.
And during the Obama administration, he did give a tax break to quote unquote small businesses. I got a check that was the biggest check I've ever seen with my own 2 eyes. But we didn't hire any more people because our business didn't go up.
Right.
And so I gave the check to my CFO, our chief financial officer. Did we buy some new computers, Tom, and some desk and a couple of chairs? Yeah, we did. Did we need more people? No, because my sales didn't go up or down because I got a check back. I keep saying, give the check to the people walking on the street. It will force me to hopefully build a fair-minded, quality product, and then I think I will get some of that money back, which will then spur demand for me to continue to grow. And again, I'm not adverse to getting big checks from the government. It's just frustrating. I was sitting at a table last night, and my wife and I are sitting there with a guy who's a mechanic, my son who delivers pizza, and I go, they gave us a big break, and these 2 young people got nothing, or close to nothing.
No, you're absolutely right, Todd. And the reason why the Obama stimulus was successful was because they lowered the Social Security withholding rate for a year, which meant that average working people got a little extra money in their pocket, and they created demand for your products. Todd,
You're
thank
listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Nice to hear from a business person who gets it. Todd is spot on. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Steve in Phoenix, Arizona. Hey, Steve, thanks for watching Free Speech TV on the Dish Network. What's on your mind today?
Yes, Tom. I really want to. I like how Todd thinks. He's very smart and a nice Valley of the Sun guy who thinks right.
Yep.
What I'd like to say here is the economic terrorists, and they just had a field day yesterday, and their stooges and their flunkies. They've been out in full force, as you can see from your program and other ones and stuff.
Yeah.
And, I'm a bit older like you are, and my mom, she lived through the Great Depression. And she told me back in the 70s, she goes, don't ever think, something like this can't happen again.
Yep.
She says, because I lived through one.
Yep.
And, at the time I thought, well, yeah. But I'll tell you, with these policies they're enacting and stuff, and getting rid of the top marginal tax rate, because we're still under Reaganomics, make no mistake.
Yep. As long as the top tax rate is below 50%, we're under Reaganomics. We're not under classic Keynesian economics.
Exactly. And until we get back to the 74 to 91%, that's the only way we're going to have some infrastructure and real growth.
I agree.
And the thing of it is, she also told me, she says, the Republicans, she says, they're for the rich. This is way back years ago. They're for the rich, and the Democrats, they're for the poor and the regular folks. And unfortunately, we've got too many people, they don't have 2 nickels to rub together, and they're voting for the monarchs. And,
right.
Until they start getting
and they're believing the nonsense that is coming out of, in some cases, third parties who are just trying to exploit it, or in more often Republicans or quote conservatives, the billionaire funded shills and think tanks who are saying, oh, there's no difference between the 2 parties, and Obama was a terrible president, and Bill Clinton gave away the store, quack, quack, quack. And there are huge differences between the two parties. And if you can't see what Scott Pruitt has been doing to our environment, or what Ryan Zinke is doing to our public lands, what Donald Trump, what Steve Mnuchin is doing on behalf of big banks and big corporations, if you can't see that, wow. I mean, I just
Yes, exactly. And also, it's just like Betsy DeVos. Look what she's doing to the Department of Education.
Exactly.
It's kind of like what Bill Bennett did when Reagan put him in charge.
Exactly.
But one thing I want to mention here is this person yesterday who called in and supposedly making $132,000 a year.
Right.
If I'm not mistaken, I think he said he was a former union member, or he's a retired union worker.
Right.
Well, I got to say this: if that is the case, if that's truly the case, he's forgotten where he made his money and where his roots are. Don't you think so, Tom?
I would say so, yeah, if he was calling up to pitch the wonders of this Republican tax scam.
Yeah.
But I'm skeptical of basically everything he said. But even if everything he said was true, it's like, really, you're going to gloat about the fact that you're making over $100,000 a year and you're getting an extra $2,000 from the government at the same time that some 20 million kids are going to lose health insurance? You're gloating about that?
Probably a Christian, too, and all that goes to church.
Yeah,
the party of family values.
Yeah, whose health insurance would Jesus destroy?
Exactly. Right? He was the ultimate liberal.
Yeah. What Jesus was, yes. Yeah. Thank you, Steve. Thanks for the call, and thanks for watching Free Speech TV on the Dish Network. I appreciate it. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. Stick around. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And 6 people just were acquitted, but there's still 186 people on trial in Washington, D.C., who were kettled by the police into the same area where a small group of people were breaking windows. And these, about $100,000 worth of damage, property damage. And these what'd you say, Nate, 86? 186 people are facing, again, 60 and 70-year jail sentences. Today was the day that the Enabling Acts were passed in Germany in 1933, which was arguably the death of democracy in Germany. And there was a lot of Sturm und Drang and hysteria around the Patriot Act when that was passed right after 9/11, as basically, the modern version of the German Enabling Acts. It wasn't anywhere near that draconian, but I'm not holding my breath. Tony in Atlanta. Hey, Tony, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how you doing, man?
I'm well. What's up?
Hey, man, just a couple of quick things real fast. That guy they called in a little while ago, and you cut him off when he was talking about the union with Bill Clinton. I'm glad you got that nut job straight, okay?
Yeah, you're welcome.
That was very refreshing to hear that, okay?
Thank you.
And then this thing about AT&T and Comcast giving all these bonuses. Come on, man. Who are they fooling? They could have given these people bonuses 30 years ago with all the money they made.
Well, they're fooling all the people who watch Fox News and listen to Right Wing Hate Radio.
Exactly.
Guarantee it.
Exactly. And then the next thing I want to say, like these Republicans, the guys in the blue states that didn't vote for the bill, I guess they trying to let their constituency say, okay, no, we didn't vote for this year. Yeah, you didn't vote for it because you knew there was already enough votes in there to get it passed anyway.
Right.
So all they're going to do is, most likely, I'm hoping that some of their constituents won't come back and fall for that little fake okie doke and go and vote for them again when time comes around. So, well, they didn't vote for this year, so I'm going to vote for them again and put them right back in office.
Right. Yeah. Hopefully the American people will figure this out, and hopefully we'll see the real consequences, the real world consequences when the Republicans get around to coming up with a budget for the United States, of trying to budget with $1.5 trillion more debt that we had to borrow in the bond markets in order to hand that money off to the Koch brothers and their buddies. I mean, that's what it boils down to. Tony, very well said. Thanks for the call, and thanks for listening to Sirius XM. Russell in Hickory Hills, Illinois. Hey, Russell, what's on your mind?
Yeah, you know, Tom, my friends were talking to me, and we were talking about the speech yesterday, and nobody really picked it up to the end. Did you notice that Donald Trump found time to have Dana Black speak? You know who Dana Black is.
No, I don't.
She's running for Corker seat in the Senate.
Oh, my.
With Marsha Blackburn.
Yeah, I know Marsha Blackburn. In fact, Marsha Blackburn, I believe, is the one who has proposed or introduced legislation in the House of Representatives that would, quote, restore net neutrality. But actually what it is a very light touch regulation of the Internet service providers that is exactly what they want, basically.
I think, Tom, she's running for Senate, too.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, wasn't it amazing? You had 292 people, besides the kiss ruppers. That was embarrassing enough. I mean, let's be honest. Tim Scott, can he stoop any lower than what he was? Did you notice yesterday, Tom? Lisa Murkowski, Heller.
Oh, all these people were sucking up to Trump. Everybody has figured out, from the Saudis to the Chinese to the Republican Party now, they've figured out if you suck up to Donald Trump, he will give you what you want. He is an easy mark. He is not a strategic businessman. He is not a particularly smart man. He is not a good negotiator. If you give him what he wants, and most of what he wants is love and approval. If you give him what he wants, he will give you whatever you want, and that's a very dangerous formula.
I think the girl.
Yeah, and then you end up with a president who is completely surrounded by yes men and women, and has no counter voices coming back. I mean, that's not a good thing. Russell, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Thanks for listening to WCPT. Michael in Los Angeles. Hey, Michael, you're on the air. What's on your mind? Michael?
I was on the bus the other. Hello?
Yeah, you're on the air.
Anyway, I just called to support your position on this tax bill. I know it's a scam, and more people too need to understand that it's a scam too. Thank you. That's pretty much it.
Okay, Michael, thank you very much for the call. It's an amazing scam, and it's amazing how they pulled this thing off. We'll see how long they can hold it together. Elizabeth in Brookville, Ohio. Hey, Elizabeth, what's on your mind today?
Tom, I went through a poor neighborhood a few days ago, and I observed this sign that said, if a member of your household receives SSI funds, jobs with training. And Ohio is a test state for the Republicans, and Kentucky and Tennessee and West Virginia are places where they actually implement a lot of the activities that goes on in Ohio. Now, what they're planning to do is to use, which is why these funds that we receive for Social Security and everything is under consideration, is that they're figuring out a way they could take those funds that used to go towards our entitlements and SSI and turn them over to corporations to hire people at the very minimum labor cost.
Yep.
It's a sad day in American history.
Yeah, the banksters want to administer Social Security. They've been right up front about that since the 1930s. You're looking at $2.5 trillion sitting in the Social Security Trust Fund. If that was sitting in Bank of America, they'd be making billions of dollars a year in interest. The health insurance companies, who are also banksters, they want to administer Medicare and Medicaid. They don't care if it's government money or private money, and the Republicans want all this to happen because the health insurance industry and the banksters are the ones who are funding the Republican Party, among others. The petro billionaires, the fossil fuel industry is, of course, at the top of that list. Elizabeth, spot on. Very well said. Thank you for the call. We'll be back. Professor Richard Wolff is going to be with us today, too. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club, and today we're reading from Arundhati Roy's brilliant book, Capitalism, A Ghost Story. This is from the afterword at the very end of the book. Yesterday morning, the police cleared Zuccotti Park, but today the people are back. The police should know that this protest is not a battle for territory. We're not fighting for the right to occupy a park here or there. We're fighting for justice. Justice is not just for the people of the United States, but for everybody. What you've achieved since September 17th, when the Occupy movement began in the United States, is to introduce a new imagination, a new political language into the heart of the empire. You've reintroduced the right to dream into a system that tried to turn everybody into zombies, mesmerized into equating mindless consumerism with happiness and fulfillment. As a writer, let me tell you, this is an immense achievement. I cannot thank you enough. We are talking about justice. Today, as we speak, the Army of the United States is waging a war of occupation in Iraq and Afghanistan. U.S. drones are killing civilians in Pakistan and beyond. Tens of thousands of U.S. troops and death squads are moving into Africa. If spending trillions of dollars of your money to administer occupations in Iraq and Afghanistan is not enough, a war against Iran is being talked up. Ever since the Great Depression, the manufacture of weapons and the export of war have been key ways in which the United States has stimulated its economy. Just recently, under President Obama, the United States made a $60 billion arms deal with Saudi Arabia. It hopes to sell thousands of bunker busters to the United Arab Emirates. It has sold $5 billion worth of military aircraft to my country, India, my country, which has more poor people than all the poorest countries of Africa put together. All these wars, from the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki to Vietnam, Korea, Latin America, have claimed millions of lives. All of them fought to secure the, quote, American way of life, end quote. Today we know that the American way of life, the model that the rest of the world is meant to aspire toward, has resulted in 400 people owning the wealth of half the population of the United States. It has meant thousands of people being turned out of their homes and jobs while the U.S. government bailed out banks and corporations. American International Group alone was given $182 billion in the bailout. The Indian government worships U.S. economic policy. As a result of 20 years of the free market economy, today 100 of India's richest people own assets equal to 1/4 of the country's GDP, while more than 80% of Indian people live on less than 50 cents a day. 250,000 farmers driven into a spiral of death have committed suicide. We call this progress and now think of ourselves as a superpower. Like you, we are well qualified. We have nuclear bombs and obscene inequality. The good news is that people have had enough and are just not going to take it anymore. The Occupy movement has joined thousands of other resistance movements all over the world in which the poorest of people are standing up and stopping the richest corporations in their tracks. Few of us dreamed that we would see it, the people of the United States on our side, trying to do this in the heart of empire. I don't know how to communicate the enormity of what this means. The 1% say we don't have demands. They don't know, perhaps, that our anger alone would be enough to destroy them. But there are some things, a few pre-revolutionary thoughts I had for us to think about together. We want to put a lid on this system that manufactures inequality. We want to put a cap on the unfettered accumulation of wealth and property by individuals as well as corporations. As capitalists and Liddites, we demand, 1, an end to cross-ownership in business. For example, weapons manufacturers cannot own TV stations. Mining corporations cannot run newspapers. Business houses cannot fund universities. Drug companies cannot control public health funds. 2, Natural resources and essential infrastructure, water supply, electricity, health, and education cannot be privatized. 3, everybody must have a right to shelter, education, and health care. 4, the children of the rich cannot inherit their parents' wealth. This struggle has reawakened our imagination. Somewhere along the line, capitalism reduced the idea of justice to mean just human rights. The idea the idea of dreaming of equality became blasphemous. We're not fighting to tinker with reforming a system that needs to be replaced. As a capist and a lidite, I salute your struggle. Salam and Zimbad Dad. That's the end of the book. This is from the very opening of it, chapter 1. Is it a house or a home? A temple to the new India or a warehouse for its ghosts? Ever since Antilla arrived in Altamont Road in Mumbai, exuding mystery and a quiet menace, things have not been the same. Here we are, the friend who took me there said. Pay your respects to our new ruler. Antilla belongs to India's richest man, Mukesh Ambani. I'd read about this most expensive dwelling ever built, the 27 floors, 3 helipads, 9 lifts, hanging gardens, ballrooms, weather rooms, gymnasiums, 6 floors of parking, and 600 servants. Nothing had prepared me for the vertical lawn, a soaring 27-story high wall of grass attached to a vast metal grid. The grass was dry in patches, bits have fallen off in neat rectangles, clearly trickle down hadn't worked. But gush up certainly has. That's why in a nation of 1.2 billion, India's 100 richest people own assets equivalent to 1/4 of the GDP. And then Arundhati Roy goes on from there talking about how India is kind of an example of capitalism run amok. Capitalism, a ghost story by Arundhati Roy.
Book Kingdom of the
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Richard Wolff is on the line with us. Dr. Richard Wolff, the economist, co-founder of Democracy at Work, the author most recently of Capitalism's Crisis Deepens, Essays on the Global Economic Meltdown. His website, democracyatwork.info or rdwolf with 2 Fs.com. You can tweet him at Prof. Wolf, as in Professor Wolf, PROFWLLFF, or at democracy@WRK. Professor Wolff, welcome back to the program.
Thank you very much, Tom. Glad to be here.
It is great having you on. I wanted to get, you're a real economist, and I wanted to get your thoughts on what the meaning of this Republican tax scam is, what impact it will have, both over the short term and the long term economically. And you're also an astute political observer. I'm curious your thoughts on the politics of it.
Okay, well, even though I have my PhD in economics and all the rest of it, this bill has nothing to do with economics. In many cases, it flaunts the very economics that we mostly teach in American universities. By that I mean we've just come off of 35 years of growing inequality in the United States, income and wealth, and a clear growing majority of Americans who don't want that, who don't like it, who not only don't want it to continue, they want to reverse it to get to a much less unequal society. Given that, the remarkable thing about this new bill, this so-called tax reform, and the word reform has to have 3 or 4 quotation marks around it, the fact of the matter is it will significantly worsen the inequality that already besets the United States. It is an act of redistributing wealth from the bottom and the middle to those at the top. There's no nice way to say it. There's no fancy language to disguise it. Most Americans, to their credit, understand that, as every poll shows how unpopular it is. But we live, and here comes the economics, we live in a time and in an economy where the wealth distribution is so skewed to the top already that we have created among those at the top, the 1%, the 3%, however you calculate it, a clear understanding that they have a disproportionate share of the wealth in a country that is at least legally committed to universal suffrage, which means that we, the people, have the bulk of the votes, and they, the tiny minority, have the bulk of the wealth. It is then only a matter of time before we understand that we can use the ballot and change this situation and undo the inequality created by this economic system. To protect themselves, they've bought the political system. And that explains why, at the end of 35 years of growing inequality, we pass a tax bill that makes that inequality worse.
So what in addition to exacerbating inequality, and there are all these social ills that have been, you know, so well documented by Pickett and Kate Pickett and Richard
Williamson.
Yeah, and you know, in the spirit level and in why inequality matters. That in and of itself is terrible. That rising inequality, or just the presence of inequality, leads to everything from, you know, higher teenage pregnancy rates to more STDs to more mental illness to more crime to, you know, to more depression to more suicide to more divorces to more unwanted children. You know, blah de blah de blah. Right? Is that we know the ills of inequality. Are there economic crises that we may face beyond simple inequality that will come out of this tax bill? I mean, I look back at 1921 when Harding ran on the his campaign platform was more business in government, less government in business. In other words, privatize and deregulate. And he campaigned on dropping that 91% tax rate that funded World War I down to 25%, which he did. And that kicked off the Roaring '20s and led us right to the Great Crash in 1929. Reagan cut taxes in the early 80s, and that led to the Great Crash in 1987, the second worst stock market crash since 1929. George W. Bush cuts taxes in the early 2000s, and what do we get in 2007, 2008, 2009? Another great crash. It seems to me like this is the kind of thing, this is the kind of Republican politics that Harding, Coolidge, and Hoover did, that both Bushes, that Reagan and both Bushes did, that inevitably leads to bubbles and crashes. Or am I missing something?
No, and that's what I meant earlier. You're missing nothing. That's conventional economics. It goes something like this. Every dollar that you put into the hands of people who are working class or middle class or poor, they will spend, and that's because they have to sustain their lifestyles. They need to spend pretty much what they earn, and they're lucky if they don't go into debt and spend more than they earn. Contrarily, if you put a dollar in the hands of very rich people, they already are saving, that is, not spending a large portion of what they earn because they earn so much. So if you are making greater inequality, in effect, you are making your poor and middle less able to buy and your rich people more able to buy, which rich people can't and won't do because they're already spending more than they can possibly consume as it stands, and that therefore you are undercutting the demand in your society for goods and services, and that's a much deeper threat to jobs and the future than anything else you could do.
So you're saying this tax cut could be economically suppressive rather than stimulative?
Absolutely. The nonsense spewing out from Trump and the others about how they know the future, and set aside the absurdity of these folks predicting the future. Let's remember that even Trump and his people didn't think he was going to win the election. I mean, their knowledge of the future is nothing to count on, but they're telling us, just wait. In some future time, this tax cut is going to have all these wonderful benefits. It reminds me of medieval landlords telling peasants who are dying of starvation that they shouldn't really be worried because a wonderful time in heaven is awaiting them just right after they die. I mean, this is unspeakable economic nonsense that is being spewed by people who want you to believe that what they've done to improve their wealth even more now is going to, in some future time, trickle down in the form of benefits for you. This hustle has been perpetrated on the American people so many times, I would have thought you can't possibly run that hustle again.
Yeah, but well, they did, and they've got willing helpers in Fox News and right-wing hate radio. We have a little less than a minute left before we hit a hard break here, Professor Wolf. Thoughts on how Americans should be responding to this?
Well, here I'm terribly disappointed politically. The Democratic Party politely votes against this and then quietly sits down. I mean, this is an outrage built upon another outrage perpetrated by an outrageous president and government. There ought to be student demonstrations in the schools and labor movement strikes and other things. There ought to be a real political opposition in the terms that we need to show what the people clearly feel about this. It needs to be some leadership. And I am deeply disappointed that the Democratic Party has shown no ability or willingness to partner with the union movement, the student movement, women who showed what they could do right after the election of Trump, poor people and others, to begin to say this has gone way beyond what ought to be allowed.
Yeah. Well, if nothing else, then this represents an opportunity. I know the Progressive Caucus is all over this thing. There are a number of Democrats who are raising that point, but I think you're right. As a party, I haven't seen a position statement. Hopefully, it'll come. Richard, and some good political theater like the Tea Party did. Professor Richard Wolf, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Tom, and look forward to our next time.
Thank you. Back at you.
The Thom Hartmann Program.
And the happiest of holidays, Professor Wolf. We will be back right after this. Welcome back. Morris in Long Beach, California. Hey, Morris, what's on your mind today?
Well, hold on, Professor. Let me get this thing cleared up. Okay, here we go. Yes, here we go. First of all, what I want to say is this, Professor. The Democratic Party is paid to lose. You know that. They're doing a fantastic job. We've had experience in this country for the last 40 years, what is called microaggression. We know what the radical rights plan is for this country. Just read Nancy McLean's book, Democracy in Chains.
Right.
The only way we can resist, Professor, in my opinion, we got to shut down the United States government. Now, hold on. I get my Social Security checks after Christmas, so don't think I'm not contributing. But we got to have an agenda when we shut this thing down. We're losing right now. What do we got to lose? And look at the Democratic leadership. Kamala Harris, she took money not to put Angelo Mazzillo in prison, and that was a guy who had owned Countrywide. They had more assets than anybody, any financial institution in the world in terms of real estate holdings, and we knew the guy was a fraud. Her own staff said, why don't you prosecute this man? She took the money and made the homeless population increase. What, Cory Booker? Is he the head of our party? The guy that voted against bringing discount drugs in from Canada so people could live? What, Hillary Clinton? I'm not going to go there. What do we have to lose? If, as long as we remain complacent, then we got a hand in what's happening to us. Shut down the U.S. government. It'll fall in the laps of Donald Trump and everybody that's got an R and a public official in front of their name. Shut it down. What do we got to lose? I'm just going to hang up, Professor. Talk to you later.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Morris. I think what we have to lose is our democracy. What little is left of it. And shutting down the government is not a good idea. And, yeah, Cory Booker voted poorly on the pharmaceutical bill, and it's obvious he did so because he's from New Jersey, and there's a bunch of big pharmaceutical companies there, and they support his candidacy. And Kamala Harris, again, you've got a Democrat from a big state, California. You cannot run a campaign in California without big money, and so there's no doubt in my mind that she has been compromised in some regards with some of these industries. This is true of probably most, if not all, of the big state Democrats, and 100% of the Republicans. Even the small state Republicans. But it doesn't mean that Cory Booker and Kamala Harris are terrible people. What it means is that they are operating, they're doing the best they can inside a system that has been corrupted by the Supreme Court. And when we sit around and point the finger of blame at politicians like Harris and Booker who are trying, broadly speaking, trying to do good, and frankly, I think need our support when they do good. And certainly Cory Booker got slapped down badly when he did that pharma bill. He did an apology tour after that, you'll recall. He got it. Shouldn't have done that. And I think more and more Democrats are getting it. They're looking at the Bernie example. They're looking at what happened and saying, okay, I've got to go beyond this. And the terrible conundrum that they're facing and that the party is facing is that as long as these Supreme Court rules, these laws created by the Supreme Court in a way that defies the Constitution does not give the Supreme Court the power to create laws. As long as these laws that were created by the Supreme Court that say that corporations are people and that giving money to politicians is protected by the First Amendment, as long as those stand, we're going to have this kind of a problem. It's got nothing to do with who is in office. It has to do with the system. And that's why the important work of publiccitizen.org and movetoamend.org and the other groups that are working to pass a constitutional amendment that says that money is not speech and corporations are not people, to go around the Supreme Court. And this will be the 4th or 5th time that a constitutional amendment has been passed to get around a stupid Supreme Court decision. That needs to be done, and needs to be done now. Welcome back. 20 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you. Pat in Waneta, Nebraska, if I'm saying that right. Pat, what's on your mind today?
Hey, God bless you. It's Juanita.
Juanita. Okay.
I agree with you and with Dr. Richard Wolff. The Democratic Party needs a shot in the arm. I bet most Americans, even most Democrats, don't know what the slogan of the Democratic Party is, and I couldn't remember it, so I Googled it. A better deal. Well, it's lame and it's dead. What does it mean? No wonder Republicans are just steamrolling over us. I'm actually an independent, I'm a progressive socialist, but I'm going to join the Democratic Party because I think that's our only hope. And my first contribution is a catchy, meaningful slogan. And here it comes. Prosperity for all Americans,
Brilliant.
Not just the rich.
Brilliant.
Okay, so that gives us something under which to lump all of this criticism of the Republicans and all the filth that they're doing. It gives us a goal.
Yeah. You might even want to expand it slightly. Prosperity and fairness for all Americans or something like that.
Well, I was trying to keep it short because,
Short is good.
No, God, no, you're right, of course. But I thought we could lump everything up. If we prosper, then we can... We're not going to prosper with no net neutrality. We're losing money. Yeah. We're not going to prosper with spending more for health insurance, which shouldn't even be in the mix. I'm with you.
Right.
But, hey, thanks for all your hard work, Thom. You rock.
Okay. Thank you, Pat. And thanks for the kind call. And spot on, everything you said. I'm with you. Barbara in Fredonia, Wisconsin. Hey, Barbara, what's on your mind today?
This is Marvin.
Oh, it's Marvin. I'm sorry. Hey, Marvin, what's on your mind?
First-time caller.
Okay, thank you.
I got one question for you. The national debt clock, why can't they keep a national debt clock of Trump's flying all over the place in Air Force One to Mar-a-Lago on all his golf courses? And the other thing I'd like to know is, has anybody noticed, I've noticed this a lot, when he gives a speech, he's all sniffing like he's on cocaine.
Right.
Did you ever notice that?
I have. I've been noticing it since the primary, and I don't know what's causing it, whether he's got some sort of a mechanical obstruction, a deviated septum or something like that, or whether it's a symptom of something deeper. I've heard people say that it could even be a symptom of early stage of heart failure or something. Who knows? I mean, we don't have any idea, because just like we don't see his tax returns, we don't see his medical records either.
Hey, Thom, I got one more thing. Boy, do I miss Ed Schultz.
Yeah, Ed's a good guy. Marvin, thank you for the call. Reza in Hot Springs National Park, Arkansas. Hey, is it Reza or Reza?
Reza.
Reza. Hey, Reza, what's on your mind today?
I was just thinking earlier when 3 senators voted to stop repeal of Affordable Health Act, or as pejoratively Republicans call it, Obamacare. They were 3 Republicans, if I'm not mistaken, Murkowski of Alaska, McCain of Arizona, and Susan Collins of Maine. And if I'm not mistaken, their only reason was because what that will do to their poor citizens.
Right.
Am I correct?
I think so, yeah.
No. Susan Collins is not a new senator in U.S. Senate or Congress, is she?
No. In fact, there was...
She's been there 3 or 4 terms as a senator.
That's right.
She is not naive.
Correct.
To get a, what I call promise from the turtle that is head of the Senate right now.
Yeah, Mitch McConnell.
That she's going to get that issue of poor and insurance taken care of. She wasn't fooled. She knew it's a BS, part of my language.
Yeah, she was looking for a fig leaf so that, you know, the citizens of Maine would not bump her out of the Senate in the next election.
I hope so. I hope so, really, because these people lie like anything.
Yeah.
And they don't care about poor. They don't care about children who will not have health insurance or nothing.
Right. Yeah, no, Susan Collins enthusiastically voted for this thing, and she said that she was getting, you know, a couple little concessions, and, you know, I know, I was assured by Mitch McConnell that we would, you know, no, sorry, you know, Mitch McConnell's a liar. He's always been a liar. He will continue to be a liar. He's a Republican, after all. Reza, thank you for the call. Very well said. Carl in Vernon Hills, Illinois. Hey, Carl, what's on your mind today?
Good morning, Tom. Glad to listen to you live for change, and happy holidays to you and your staff.
Thank you.
2 quick points. You keep mentioning that people write letters to the senators. I apologize, I got a cold, but I'm not sounding too bad. Don't write letters, because you mail it to the Senate office, as you know, you've mentioned many times, it takes 2 or 3 weeks to get to them.
Unless you send it to their local office.
Or, yeah, that's what I mean. But you keep saying send letters to your senators. Say send a postcard or send it to a local office.
Yes, because if it's an envelope and it goes to Washington, D.C., it has to go through a special mail sorting facility that basically deep packet inspects every letter for anthrax. I mean, this all goes back to the anthrax attacks, which we still haven't figured out, by the way, who did, but it sure did stimulate the passage of the Patriot Act just in time, right?
Sure.
That's a whole nother, you know, and I don't want to sound like Alex Jones here, but there was something really funky with that. But yeah, I get it, Carl, and spot on. Mail postcards if you're going to send it to Washington, D.C., and if you want to send a letter, send it at the local office. Yeah.
One other quick point, if I may.
If you may, yes.
November is not the next election. March is. We have to make sure that we get progressive Democrats on the ballot for November.
For primaries.
We got to push hard to get them on.
Yeah, absolutely. Make sure that you are registered to vote. In some states, you have to be registered to vote by November of this year to be able to vote next year. I mean, it's just, it's all over the map from state to state. So find out if you're registered to vote, find out if there are any impediments to your registering to vote. Get out there, register to vote, and get ready to participate in our elections because, yeah, you're right. There are primaries coming up. I don't think that there's any more special elections between now and next November, although there probably will be a few more obscure ones. But it is absolutely so imperative that we go from roughly 50% voter participation to let's get to 80 or 90%. I mean, let's really turn out to vote here, at least on our side of the ledger. Let's get people out to vote and make sure that they're registered to vote because they, you know, I mean, the Republicans have thrown several million people who are legitimate voters off the voting rolls. We've got to overcome that. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
More of your calls. We're going to check in with Talk Media News, too, as we roll along here. Stick around.
And welcome back to our Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Devil's Bargain by Joshua Green, the subtitle Steve Bannon, Donald Trump, and the Storming of the Presidency. This is from the afterword, the very last chapter. It's titled Kali-Yuga, which in Hinduism is when the earth goes into a phase of destruction. In the shell-shocked aftermath of the election, President Obama, looking shaken, appeared in the White House Rose Garden to deliver public remarks intended to project a sense of calm. A sense, really, that the basic stability of our country remained intact. Sun is up, Obama said. I know everybody had a long night. I did as well. Had a chance to talk to President-elect Trump last night about 3:30 in the morning, I think it was, to congratulate him on winning the election. End of quote. The next day, when the two men appeared together in the Oval Office, it felt as if the world had slipped through the looking glass. Trump quickly named Bannon his chief White House strategist. Republicans controlled every branch of government. With Trump's ability to defy every political norm, anything seemed possible. Who could argue otherwise after what had just transpired? And yet, within days of his inauguration, Trump's White House was plunged into chaos and scandal from which it has not recovered and may never. Bannon, the imaginative reconceiver of U.S. politics, hung streams of paper listing Trump's promises from the walls of his West Wing office. His strategy, as always, was to launch furious attacks, this time to, quote, shock the system, end quote, and rapidly reorient the federal government in a more nationalist direction. He called this, with what I took to be intentional irony, a shock and awe approach to asserting Trump's power. But Trump's flurry of activity quickly ran into problems. There was his executive order, sprung a week after his inauguration, banning immigrants from 7 majority Muslim countries, which set off nationwide protests and was blocked by the courts. His firing 2 weeks later of National Security Director Michael Flynn for contacts with the Russians. The collapse of his first major legislative initiative, a bill to repeal Obamacare. His firing of FBI Director James Comey. And the swift descent of the West Wing into a viper's nest of backstabbing and leaks. This quick turn toward a crack-up was hardly unforeseeable or even altogether surprising, but it contrasted sharply with the success of a candidate who had dominated his opponents, shaped news coverage, and shown himself to be all but impervious to the forces that overwhelm other politicians. Bannon, whose wild gambits in the campaign had invariably paid off, seemed to run out of magic tricks when Hillary Clinton was no longer a target. The government wasn't as malleable to Trump and Bannon's aggressions as the Republican Party and the cable news channels had been, and they found themselves consistently thwarted and undermined by the courts, by right-wing hardliners in Congress, by their own inexperience and Trump's errant tweets, and by the bureaucracy they were now overseeing. The crises these failures precipitated in the White House cost Bannon much of his influence and soon threatened Trump's presidency. While it's still early in his term, the possibilities that Trump's most ardent supporters once imagined for his presidency already seem to be mostly foreclosed. I think there are 3 main reasons why Trump's administration has so quickly fallen into disorder and confusion. Number 1, Trump thought being president was about asserting dominance. Just after he'd locked up the GOP nominations, Trump said something to me that crystallized his view of politics and explains, to my mind, much of his subsequent difficulties. Quote, I deal with people that are very extraordinarily talented people, he told me. I deal with Steve Wynn. I deal with Carl Icahn. I deal with killers that blow these politicians away. It's not even the same category. This, he meant politics. This is a category that's like 19 levels lower. You understand what I'm saying? Brilliant killers. Trump was equating politics with business and the presidency with the job of being a big shot CEO, a killer. He filled the upper ranks of his administration with people of a similar mindset. Gary Cohn, Wilbur Ross, Steve Bannon, aggressive, domineering men accustomed to getting their way by dint of their position. None had government experience, nor did many others in the West Wing. So none anticipated the problems this approach to governing would cause. Trump's self-conception as the all-powerful apprentice boss blinded him to a fundamental truth of the modern presidency, that the president needs Congress more than the Congress needs the president. Trump's domineering instinct served him poorly, since most members of Congress are secure in their jobs and accountable mainly to their own constituents. And it backfired disastrously when Trump fired Comey after he refused to submit to a pledge of loyalty to his boss. Number 2, Trump ran against the Republican Party, Wall Street, and Paul Ryan, but then took up their agenda. Populists often struggle to govern, but Trump scarcely attempted to lead the populist revolution that he promised. In May, he told me he would transform the Republican Party into a workers' party. But while he kept voicing populist shibboleths, the legislative agenda he took up was the standard conservative fare pushed by Paul Ryan. During the GOP primary, Trump has shrewdly sensed its weak point, Ryan's desire to finance tax cuts for the rich by cutting programs like Social Security and Medicaid, harmed the party's white blue-collar base. Trump told me he'd made this point to Ryan directly. He said, quote, "There's no way a Republican is going to beat a Democrat when the Republican is saying we're going to cut your Social Security, and the Democrat is saying we're going to keep it and give you more." The book is Devil's Bargain by Joshua Green, Steve Bannon, Donald Trump, and the Storm for the President.
I'm Nina Turner, and you're watching Free Speech TV.
Anytime, any place you want. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and let's find out what's on your mind today. Patty in Harsenstein Island, Washington. Hey, Patty, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. I am the person that was evidently been on your mind for a while because you cut me off.
Oh, yeah, you were singing. My apologies, Patty.
Well, Tom, I have. Oh, please don't apologize. You have been nothing but kind and gracious to me. You have allowed me to sing to Bernie Sanders supporters the night before the Ohio primary and all. But what was interesting was that you had said that you were thinking about this because you had been shut down by one of your teachers and you hadn't written poetry for decades.
Right.
Right. And so I thought I had a really funny story about what I went through when you shut me down. It took me back to 30 years ago when I called my very first talk show. And I hadn't called a talk show for 30 years until I started listening to your show about a dozen years ago, and then I called you. So there was this one guy the one time, and then 30 years later, you. So I called up this guy. He had been ranting and raving in the Sacramento-Stockton area about people who smoked pot and being dredges of society, and we got into this conversation, and I told him that if I had a tomato and a pot plant, that I was an adult and I could take it into my bedroom, and it was my privacy, and I could do what I wanted. Well, he cut me off, and then he said, "I bet she thinks murder'd be all right if it was done in the privacy of her own bedroom."
Whoa.
So, I know. So I called back the station, and I informed them that one of the things I did was I took the time, I did a lot of volunteer work, and I got an FCC license, and I did public radio. And by the way, shout out to KBCS, that's who I'm listening to on now. And that my station program manager, Steve, had in fact been murdered about 3 weeks before that call. And that this man owed me an apology, but that I would never get it because I would never, ever give him airtime again.
Right.
And his show moved out of the Stockton, Sacramento area. Like this was in 1983, 84. And I didn't listen to another talk show until I found yours on Air America. That was Rush Limbaugh.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's, and this is one of the little things that, when I first got into talks radio, I noticed that conservatives do a lot, and I resolved that I would never do, which is to trash people when they're not present to defend themselves. They would have a liberal guest on, he or she would make their points, they'd let them go, and then they'd spend the next hour trashing the person who's not there to defend them, or the same thing with their callers. And, I think I've been pretty rigorous in the 14, 15 years we've been doing this show about never trashing somebody who's not here, no matter how egregious their presentation was.
No, you have been, like I said, you have been very kind and you've been very gracious. And the little ditties that I've sung about the Koch brothers and Trump and all of those, it was only for your show. I don't do the political tweedle-deedle-done stuff. Like I said, I don't do any of the stuff.
Well, thank you, Patty. But we've got to, it started a trend of people calling in and wanting to sing on the air, and I just had to put an end to it.
Right, I understand. So that maybe next time I'll just say a little poem.
Okay, if it's short. If it's short.
But I didn't want you to feel bad, and I wanted to thank you from the bottom of my heart for all that you do and having allowed me to have a voice.
Thank you,
because
Patty.
for 30 years, I didn't.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Patty.
Happy holiday, and love to all of you.
Thank you, and happy holidays to you, Patty. I hope it's a wonderful time of year, and it's great to hear from you, and I'm glad I can kind of close the loop on that little neurotic moment of mine.
Yes,
Okay.
I know what it feels like.
Yeah, okay, I got to move along, Patty. Thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you. Steve in Blacksburg, Virginia. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind today?
Oh, yeah, Tom, it's great whenever you have Richard Wolff on your program. It's like you and Richard Wolff are two of my favorite intellects in the entire world.
Well, thank you.
And
it's a rarefied company to be compared to.
He's got a new show himself, Economic Matters.
Yeah.
And he mentioned something the other night, trickle up, which is something that I've actually been preaching for the last 2 or 3 years. And it's like, you know, both Hillary and Bernie were talking about trying to raise minimum wage to at least $12 an hour.
Yep.
And it's like, this would boost our economy so much. But now this is the third go-around that we've had with this doggone trickle-down theory. And 87 didn't end very well. 08 didn't end very well. Dr. Wolf actually stole my thunder with that earlier when you were talking to him.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, when do we wake up and realize this is just flat stealing?
Yeah, it is. It really is.
Like, why can't we try trickle up?
Well, and the thing that blows my mind is that over a 10-year period, this is a $5 trillion tax cut for billionaires and multinational corporations. $3.5 billion of it is paid.
I consider it theft.
Yeah, $3.5 billion of it is paid for by stealing money from you and me, basically, over the next decade, and $1.5 trillion of it is paid for by going into debt, by adding to the national debt, and something that the Republicans will never do. But they did. Actually, they always do. Reagan tripled the national debt. George W. Bush doubled the national debt. The reason Republicans love to run up the debt is so that when Democrats come into office, they can scream about the debt. I've written about this, the two Santa Claus theory. Jude Winiski laid this out in the pages of the Wall Street Journal in 1976 and said, here's how Republicans can win elections in the future. We have to become the Santa Claus of tax cuts because the Democrats are the Santa Claus of Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and unemployment insurance, and we have to force the Democrats to shoot their own Santa Claus. And the way we do that is we become the Santa Claus of tax cuts when we're in power. We cut taxes hugely. We run up huge deficits. And then as soon as Democrats come into power, we start screaming about the deficits and force the Democrats to shoot their Santa, to shoot Social Security, to kill off Medicare, to kill off Medicaid. Even in small ways, President Obama is saying he'd consider a chained CPI for Social Security, for example, which, by the way, is what the Republicans just passed in their tax bill, a chained CPI to adjust the tax rates, which means that anybody who's not in the top tax bracket is going to see over the next 20 years, every year, they're going to see their taxes go up faster than their income because we're no longer tying tax brackets to the actual cost of living. The change CPI assumes that when beef gets too expensive, people start eating chicken. When chicken gets too expensive, people start eating dog food. And so they always just price out whatever the cheapest thing is. It's chained to behavior, thus the phrase change CPI.
One last point I would like to make is right after they passed that horrendous tax bill yesterday, I saw one of the Republican ladies get on television and use that old...
That old? Hello? Steve, I lost you for a second there. Are you still there?
Yeah, no, I'm still here.
Okay.
They were using that old Republican mantra, a rising tide raises all boats.
Yeah, it's actually John Kennedy was the one.
Also floods all coastal areas.
Okay. Yeah, JFK was the one who popularized that expression. I don't know where it began. It's probably an ancient cliche, but my rebuttal to it when Republicans use it is that's fine if you own a boat. But, a lot of people don't. And so the rising tide just lifts the yachts.
Nowadays, you're lucky if you own a car.
There you go, or a surfboard or a paddleboard or something. Yeah, I'm with you, Steve. A rowboat.
Well, you may need a surfboard if the rising tide keeps coming.
There you go, Steve. I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Very well said, Steve. Steve in Fort Anne, New York. Another Steve. Hey, Steve, what's up?
Hi, Tom.
Hey, Steve.
How are you?
Good. What's on your mind?
First thing first. I want to tell you that you are a great American.
Well, thank you, Steve.
And I don't want you to stop. I ever get to feel like you're down, and I don't want you to stop.
I'm going to keep doing this until I can't. I mean, I'm having a good time, Steve. So don't worry about that.
Good. A lot of my friends voted for Trump that I don't understand. A lot of friends that are more intelligent than I am, and one guy had even has a daughter that is disabled. He voted for Trump. I don't understand what happened.
And
I'm from New York.
Right. You have we have devastated the rules that required television networks to actually, and radio networks, to actually present news in the segments that are branded as news. And as a consequence of that, you've got a billionaire-owned television network, Fox News, that exclusively spews the billionaire-friendly line, although they couch it in, NASCAR, country music, women with big hair, guys with greased, I mean, it's just all the kind of right-wing stereotypes. And they couch it in this, and the people in middle America, well, and for that matter, people on the coast, I mean, there's a certain appeal to that. Oh, let's go back to the 1950s, when people of color knew their place and women knew their place and men ran the show and everything was good and, wasn't it all wonderful? Well, it wasn't all wonderful and everything wasn't good. And, but yeah, I think that a lot of the Trump voters are buying this.
There's lies.
Yeah, and we've got, the entire right-wing radio infrastructure, which is controlled by, in large part, two very large companies that are both in or close to bankruptcy, but they own all these right-wing radio stations all over the country, and that's all they'll program because they themselves, the corporations, are ideologically right-wing. And then you've got the television networks that will not put a real progressive on, even MSNBC. Very rarely do you see an actual progressive on MSNBC. The big exception to that, I think, is probably Rachel Maddow's show. But by and large, it's just kind of, mainstream stuff, as it were, which is not to slam mainstream stuff, but it would be nice if there were real progressives once in a while in the media. Steve, and that I think accounts for why, the horrors of the Trump administration are not fully chronicled. We're not getting daily updates on what Scott Pruitt did to our environment today, for example. We'll be back. It's coming up on 15 minutes before the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be back with more of your calls. Plus, we're going to check in with Bob Ney and Talk Media News in about 5 minutes. Stick around. And welcome back. Cheryl, watching Free Speech TV in Valley Springs, California. Hey, Cheryl, what's on your mind today?
Hi, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, yeah, I'm calling because of Medicare problems. I heard you say on the TV yesterday that there was going to be a 4% cut every year for the next several years, and I wasn't quite sure what that meant. But in the meantime, what I wanted to say is that I got my notification from Social Security last week, and they were supposed to be giving us an increase, for 2%, they said, which for me didn't amount to that much. But anyway, what happened is that at the same time, they increased the Medicare cost to offset exactly the amount of money that I was supposed to get. So I ended up with no increase at all. I called one of my neighbors, did the same thing to him. Now, I'm not sure if this applies to every single person and how much it was, but basically they took away whatever little they gave us and then put it into an additional cost for Medicare coverage.
Right.
So.
Yeah, not surprising, Cheryl, and it's going to get worse. That 4% cut, the last time there was a cut like this to Medicare was in 2013, and it lasted for a couple of weeks, and it was the result of, the government shutdown and the budget process. And the sequestration kicked in, and literally what happened was some people on Medicare who were getting expensive chemotherapy treatments, they had to stop their chemo. People died as a result of this. And if Congress can prevent it from happening, if after the first of the year, if Congress passes a law basically undoing the automatic cuts from sequestration, this all goes back to the first couple of years of the Obama administration when the Democrats and Republicans cut this deal where they said, it was a suicide pact, basically. The Republicans said, we'll put the Pentagon on the table. Democrats said, we'll put Social Security and Medicare on the table. And both of us agree that if we screw up and can't pass legislation or can't pass a budget, that these things will get cut. Both of our sacred cows will get hurt. And the theory was that this kind of mutual assured destruction, this kind of U.S. versus Soviet Union with nuclear weapons, would cause, both parties to not engage in bad behavior. The Republicans were not honest about this at all. They loved the sequestration. They wanted to trigger sequestration. They've triggered it twice now, and they're triggering it again with Medicare here in starting next year. And in fact, this is why Trump had to move his signing of the bill back to after the first of the year, because if he signed it today, that 4% cut to Medicare would kick in right now, and a whole lot of people who are getting services from Medicare in the year 2017 might end up owing a whole bunch of money to their doctor or their hospital or whatever it is. So they're going to try and throw that into next year so that all the Medicare providers can be told, oh, yeah, we're going to cut Medicare so you can't see as many patients or you can't do as many procedures.
So basically, what you're saying then is this 4% cut, I'm not sure where it's coming from. Are they going to cut what we get from Social Security?
No, it's Medicare.
The services or what?
It is a 4% across the board cut in the budget for Medicare. So part of that will hit their part of that will hit their ability to pay for services. Part of that will hit their ability to provide services to you. That is to take your call, keep their website updated, pay the checks. But most of it is going to fall on your providers. What you're going to find is that it's going to get harder and harder to find a doctor who will take you because they're paid less. Hospitals are going to be less enthusiastic.
That's one other thing I wanted to talk about, too, is that, everybody talks about, getting Medicare, having a kind of, society where they're basing it on sort of like a Medicare.
Yeah. Cheryl, I'm sorry, we're out of time. When the music starts, we've got 10 seconds. We'll be back. Welcome back. Phil in Greeley, Colorado. Oh, Bob, that's right. Thank you very much. It is, let's check in with, where did Bob go? He's not on the board. Oh, there he is, line 10. Let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Loving What You Do, a new book by Ellen Ratner. On the line with us, Talk Media News, is Bob Ney, the author of Sideswiped. Congressman, welcome back to the program.
Well, thank you, Tom. And I know we run up against the clock sometimes, so before we do, just want to express on behalf of Talk Media News Service what a delight it is to listen to you and to do your show and to be part of listening to actual intelligent free speech.
Well, thank you, Bob. It's really, really great. I'm very grateful to Talk Media News Service, too, for making you available to us and Ellen and everybody else, Luke Vargas, all the years that we had Victoria. Great content, and we're very appreciative of it, and I wish you the very happiest of holidays, Bob.
Yes, sir. Today, of course, as you know, you've been talking about the budget, and there was some fact-checking. I'm sure you've seen that, because in a way, the president says, well, we secretly and quietly undid the Health Care Act, Obamacare. Actually, they're putting some poison darts into it. There's no question about that, and at some point in time, it's going to have to be tweaked, or things are going to pop up that can't be ignored. But also, and I didn't catch this honestly 2 days ago, but now we know that the mandate, which you sign up, of course, for the exchange, was, quote, done away with, but it actually, the penalty, and it isn't done away with until 2019. And I had no idea 2 days ago the way they were stating it.
So he's doing away with Medicare with Obamacare rather, as of 2019, you said.
Well, yes. Well, with the mandate.
Or doing away with the mandate. That's fascinating.
But they have sold to the base, because what has been sold to the base of the Republicans, of course, is the fact, well, we didn't repeal it, we didn't get rid of it, but we, in fact, are undoing that mandate, while they actually aren't undoing it for 2018. One, I would ask why not if they were going to do it, and I know the answer, because they would have caused chaos in the system. But also, they're factoring in savings, billions of dollars of savings. Well, if you still have to go onto the exchange, then a lot of people maybe that wouldn't have went on the exchange are going to pay the penalty, so they'll go back on, if you can follow me. So, in other words, the numbers are not going to gel just on that fact alone.
Yeah.
But also, as far as undoing, the health care bill, you still have states like Ohio, my home state, which our governor, of course, even did it without legislative permission to expand Medicaid. He wanted to do that. So those expansions are still intact. And I'm not saying that what's being done in the magic of this budget and the smoke screens, I'm not saying it's not going to affect it, but to come out and say, oh, by the way, we just quietly undid it, simply is not accurate.
Yeah, yeah.
Whatsoever.
That's fascinating. What else is up, Bob?
Well, the United Nations General Assembly, and this would, watching the actual drama created by the White House was fascinating to me. In an overwhelming vote, 128 members of the United Nations General Assembly didn't agree with the Jerusalem decision. You had 35 extensions, and then very few, I think it was, 15 countries voted with us. And I looked at the list of the countries, and they're tiny little countries, you know.
Oh, we got voting with us was Rwanda, Uganda, South Sudan, Malawi, Caribbean, Pacific nations. But a number of countries didn't vote at all. I mean, you know, Canada, Poland, Australia, Mexico, they said, you know, present or not present or whatever. They didn't vote. And Trump is threatening these people. That's bizarre. That is the antithesis of what the United Nations is. The United Nations is not supposed to be the rubber stamp for the United States. It's supposed to be an international body that maintains world peace.
Well, you know, and you're right. And we have tended in the past, and especially now, we've tended to get angry if they don't agree with us, and then we threaten to pull out of the United Nations. And, of course, we always bring up the fact that they throw expensive events and it costs $100 million. You know, you can find a lot of reasons to do something. But, you know, just because we don't agree with the decision, then all of a sudden, you know, even though it was overwhelming, they're going to pull out, is what they're saying. But the bizarre part, I agree with you, that I found was the statement of Nikki Haley, our ambassador, saying, you know, I'm watching who votes, and I'm going to tell the president. That's basically about the quote, I'm going to tell the president. Well, it's no secret who votes, first of all. And then when 128 people vote against you, 2 or 3, you could imagine maybe you could retaliate. 128, I highly doubt that there's going to be the ability to retaliate. But I just thought it was fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like our president is a bully figure, and Nikki Haley is like our president's like the abusive husband, and Nikki Haley is like the kid who's participating. My metaphor stinks. I can't come up with a good one.
I know what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
I know what you're trying to say.
Anyhow, moving along.
As we go into the new year too, I'm sure that you followed the UFO sightings and the study that Harry Reid had commissioned.
Yeah.
It's not unusual, by the way, to put something in the budget. We did it in the House budgets for security measures too, to put something in and not say this is to study UFOs.
Well, it's always been part of the Pentagon budget, hasn't it?
It's right. It's always there. But today there was a gentleman. His name is Luis Elizondo, and he was part of this project, and he came out and said, I think they are here. So I just thought that was a kind of a nice thing to bring up as we enter the new year.
Remember what Reagan said to Gorbachev, Bob?
I'm sorry, what's that?
Remember on this topic, remember what Reagan said to Gorbachev?
No,
they were. I think it was when they were at Bitburg, or no, it wouldn't have been because Gorbachev wasn't there. Whatever. Reagan said to Gorbachev, if only the space aliens, I'm paraphrasing from memory here, but basically, if only the space aliens would reveal themselves, then we could all come together as a human race, or words to that effect. And, you know, it's always kind of stuck with me. I mean, it's kind of the old science fiction story, but, you know, that's what you see. When you have a common enemy, people come together.
True.
And which makes me wonder, you know, this could be food for an Alex Jones conspiracy theory. You know, Trump releases the video of the UFO, and it's not actually real, but it's there to make everybody kind of come together. I don't know. Bob Ney with Talk Media News. Thank you, Bob. I'm sorry, I can't hear you, Bob. Great talking with you. We'll be right back. That is way.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com.
And welcome back to our Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Devil's Bargain by Joshua Green, the subtitle Steve Bannon, Donald Trump, and the Storming of the Presidency. This is from the afterword, the very last chapter. It's titled Kali-Yuga, which in Hinduism is when the earth goes into a phase of destruction. In the shell-shocked aftermath of the election, President Obama, looking shaken, appeared in the White House Rose Garden to deliver public remarks intended to project a sense of calm. A sense, really, that the basic stability of our country remained intact. Sun is up, Obama said. I know everybody had a long night. I did as well. I had a chance to talk to President-elect Trump last night, about 3:30 in the morning, I think it was, to congratulate him on winning the election. End of quote. The next day, when the two men appeared together in the Oval Office, it felt as if the world had slipped through the looking glass. Trump quickly named Bannon his chief White House strategist. Republicans controlled every branch of government. With Trump's ability to defy every political norm, anything seemed possible. Who could argue otherwise after what had just transpired? And yet, within days of his inauguration, Trump's White House was plunged into chaos and scandal from which it has not recovered and may never. Bannon, the imaginative reconceiver of U.S. politics, hung streams of paper listing Trump's promises from the walls of his West Wing office. His strategy, as always, was to launch furious attacks, this time to, quote, shock the system, end quote, and rapidly reorient the federal government in a more nationalist direction. He called this, with what I took to be intentional irony, a shock and awe approach to asserting Trump's power. But Trump's flurry of activity quickly ran into problems. There was his executive order, sprung a week after his inauguration, banning immigrants from 7 majority Muslim countries, which set off nationwide protests and was blocked by the courts. His firing 2 weeks later of National Security Director Michael Flynn for contacts with the Russians. The collapse of his first major legislative initiative, a bill to repeal Obamacare. His firing of FBI Director James Comey. And the swift descent of the West Wing into a viper's nest of backstabbing and leaks. This quick turn toward a crack-up was hardly unforeseeable or even altogether surprising, but it contrasted sharply with the success of a candidate who had dominated his opponents, shaped news coverage, and shown himself to be all but impervious to the forces that overwhelm other politicians. Bannon, whose wild gambits in the campaign had invariably paid off, seemed to run out of magic tricks when Hillary Clinton was no longer a target. The government wasn't as malleable to Trump and Bannon's aggressions as the Republican Party and the cable news channels had been. And they found themselves consistently thwarted and undermined by the courts, by right-wing hardliners in Congress, by their own inexperience and Trump's errant tweets, and by the bureaucracy they were now overseeing. The crises these failures precipitated in the White House cost Bannon much of his influence and soon threatened Trump's presidency. While it's still early in his term, the possibilities that Trump's most ardent supporters once imagined for his presidency already seem to be mostly foreclosed. I think there are 3 main reasons why Trump's administration has so quickly fallen into disorder and confusion. Number 1, Trump thought being president was about asserting dominance. Just after he'd locked up the GOP nominations, Trump said something to me that crystallized his view of politics and explains, to my mind, much of his subsequent difficulties. Quote, I deal with people that are very extraordinarily talented people, he told me. I deal with Steve Wynn. I deal with Carl Icahn. I deal with killers that blow these politicians away. It's not even the same category. This, he meant politics, This is a category that's like 19 levels lower. You understand what I'm saying? Brilliant killers. Trump was equating politics with business and the presidency with the job of being a big shot CEO, a killer. He filled the upper ranks of his administration with people of a similar mindset. Gary Cohn, Wilbur Ross, Steve Bannon, aggressive, domineering men accustomed to getting their way by dint of their position. None had government experience, nor did many others in the West Wing. So none anticipated the problems this approach to governing would cause. Trump's self-conception as the all-powerful apprentice boss blinded him to a fundamental truth of the modern presidency, that the president needs Congress more than the Congress needs the president. Trump's domineering instinct served him poorly, since most members of Congress are secure in their jobs and accountable mainly to their own constituents. And it backfired disastrously when Trump fired Comey after he refused to submit to a pledge of loyalty to his boss. Number two, Trump ran against the Republican Party, Wall Street, and Paul Ryan, but then took up their agenda. Populists often struggle to govern, but Trump scarcely attempted to lead the populist revolution that he promised. In May, he told me he would transform the Republican Party into a workers' party. But while he kept voicing populist shibboleths, the legislative agenda he took up was the standard conservative fare pushed by Paul Ryan. During the GOP primary, Trump has shrewdly sensed its weak point, Ryan's desire to finance tax cuts for the rich by cutting programs like Social Security and Medicaid, harmed the party's white blue-collar base. Trump told me he'd made this point to Ryan directly. He said, quote, "There's no way a Republican is going to beat a Democrat when the Republican is saying we're going to cut your Social Security, and the Democrat is saying we're going to keep it and give you more." The book is Devil's Bargain by Joshua Green, Steve Bannon, Donald Trump, and the Storm for President.
I'm Nina Turner, and you're watching Free Speech TV.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. I'm so pleased to have Mike Papantonio back with us, the attorney, America's attorney, host of Ring of Fire Radio, author of the new legal thriller Law and Vengeance. And this is the second of these extraordinary novels that Mike Papantonio has written. TROFire.com is the website, as in the Ring of Fire, TRO Fire. You can tweet him at Ring of Fire Radio or at Levin Papantonio. Mike, welcome back to the program.
How are you?
I'm great, and it's been way too long since we've talked. I'm glad to reconnect with you and look forward to having you on more often. Tell us about your new book and how the story in it relates to what's actually happening in the world right now.
Yeah, well, it's a series of 4 books. This is the second in a series of 4, and what the book is about is actual cases that I've handled. This particular case it centers around the idea of a whistleblower case. And in that whistleblower case, what was happening was the government was making a product that was literally killing people. And unfortunately, the government, they were buying a product that was killing people, and the manufacturer of the product didn't disclose why it was killing people, but it was a gun sight that was so defective that it was off about anywhere between 2 and 3 degrees off for every 100 yards, which of course made the gun almost useless. So that's the first part of the story, and then the second part of the story deals with the C8 disaster that took place in the Ohio River Valley, where you had DuPont pumping just millions of gallons of C8 toxin into the drinking water of people, causing cancer all up and down the Ohio River Valley. Both of those cases are cases, of course, that corporate media didn't talk about because, unfortunately, DuPont's a big advertiser for them, and as you know, the weapons manufacturers are big advertisers for corporate media. So what we do is I've just reduced a lot of these stories to thrillers. Although they're true, they're dressed up a little bit in the tone, and you create a thrill. The third book that I'm working on, it has to do with the opioid crisis that we're helping head up nationally, and it's called Law and Addiction. And then the fourth book is a book called Law and Terror, dealing with the international banks that are washing money for terrorists all over the world. So
wow.
they're all based on real cases that we handled. They're dressed up, made into fiction thrillers, but they're stories that you ordinarily would not hear because corporate media doesn't tell these kind of stories. Advertisers simply don't allow them to do that.
You are on a roll, my friend. That's amazing, and your writing is so good. It's just remarkable books. I'm curious, as America's attorney, as America's lawyer, your thoughts on the rush by McConnell and the Trump administration to place, in fact, I guess they have some very specific criteria. You must be under 50. Between 30 and 40 is preferred. You must be a conservative crank. You must never have said anything bad about the president. You must, whatever. I mean, these judicial appointments that the Trump administration is doing, and the last several years, the Obama administration, when McConnell was basically blocking them to the point that John Roberts wrote a letter to Mitch McConnell saying, you're creating a crisis. This was during the Obama presidency. You're creating a crisis in the judicial bench. And then, of course, the whole year that they kept Merrick Garland away from the Supreme Court. What the hell's going on with our courts, Mike?
Well, what's happened is you have the Federalist Society now is in charge of who gets a chance to even sit in those chairs. And as you can see, the Federalist Society is sending us complete just knuckleheads. I mean, you saw the video, of course, with the judge who didn't know what a motion in limine is, had no idea what, had no idea with very, very basic issues like Dalberry, had no idea what was even being asked of him. You have judges who have never argued in front of a jury at all, have never argued in front of a judge at all, have never argued a motion at all. This is the equivalent, Tom, of going on the street and picking out some knucklehead and saying, how would you like to be in appellate federal court? And so what this really does, it does such damage to the Federalist Society. The Federalist Society at one point was able to say that, we have some real purity about us, and that is we're strict constructionists, and we simply want the Constitution followed. And now we find out really all they are is this buffoon organization who has a political agenda, and the way to end that political agenda is to get more buffoons put in the court. I got to tell you something. We'd like to think that that wasn't much different under the Obama administration, but you're talking to somebody who appears in front of federal judges quite often, and what we got with the Obama administration was a little different. They were simply white shoe, silk stocking defense corporate lawyers who had never done anything for consumers at all, and you had Obama populating the court with that. Now we're populated with utter, complete buffoons. And so at a trial level, you can understand how disastrous that is when you're arguing to a judge and they don't even understand what the rules of evidence are. That's it's pretty impractical.
Is I've read about the Federalist Society over the years, and my recollection is that it emerged in the 60s or 70s. If it was in the 70s, it might have been in response to the Powell Memo of 1971, and that it kind of came out of the same ecosystem that the John Birch Society did, only the respectable dimension of it, and that it has, in the last decade or so, become kind of one of the toys of the Koch network. Am I misinterpreting what I've been reading, or
No. The Federalist Society was based on a lie. It's nothing but a myth, and the myth is that these are people who want to have strict construction in the way that we look at the Constitution, that there should be nothing done creatively in the courts as we evolve as a society. We should still go back to the document and only look at the four corners of the document, the Constitution. But that was even a lie. What the lie is what the truth is, that this is a society that they're no different from the political hacks that surround the Koch brothers and have always surrounded the Koch brothers. They're nothing but political thugs who want a political system that inures a huge benefit to the haves and basically tramples on the rights of the have-nots. That's what the Federalist Society is. You can dress them up, they have this aura of, this aura of importance, but they are not important. If you ask most lawyers how much you really gain from anything that the Federalist Society puts out. It's almost nothing, because as you read their stuff now, you understand they're nothing more than political hacks. And we're seeing it firsthand now with these appointments that they're recommending that Trump engage with. And so I think it's great, because now we do see that they are a complete, utter fraud, and they have nothing to do with anything high-minded at all.
Yeah. We're talking with Mike Papantonio, America's lawyer. Pap, in the minute we have left before we hit a hard break here, what can Americans do about this obscenity?
Well, you know, unfortunately, right now, there's nothing they're going to be able to do. Look, here's what the Republicans want to pack the court with six. They have the right at this point. They have the ability to put 650 new federal court appointments in, from trial level, appellate level, all the way up the route. They have the ability to do 650, and that's what they've done. Trump is doing what Obama failed to do. Obama had a window. He had about a 2-year window where he could have done the same thing and given us real quality judges instead of the corporate hacks that he appointed. But so Trump learned from that, and so now Trump is using this time that he has to pack the courts, and it's going to be irreversible. When you pack 650 relatively young judges in that position, you can't reverse it. We're talking about an entire generation that's going to be affected by a complete baboon kind of a judiciary.
Amazing. Mike Papantonio, America's lawyer. His new book, Law and Vengeance, a legal thriller based on, arguably based on a true story, or a series of true stories. Mike, Pap, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Great talking to you. And check out Pap's book, Law and Vengeance, is his second. Check out his first book, too. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with your calls right after this. Back. Dave, watching Free Speech TV in Armstrong Creek, Wisconsin. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thanks a lot for everything you do, and happy holiday to you, your family, and your staff there.
Thank you. Back at you, Dave.
Thanks. So the Republicans passed this tax bill, and they're all celebrating and everything, but in the meantime, they have the spending bill that they have to get done by tonight, I guess, and I know they were promising when all these hurricanes occurred that, oh yeah, we'll take care of everything. Don't worry about it. We've got your backs. Well, they haven't figured out how to do anything to cover any of the costs so far. And are they naive enough to think that this isn't going to be continuing to happen every year? It's just going to get worse. And I'm just wondering, if anybody even gives us any thought when they're...
Oh, it's designed to get worse, Dave. It's why they put the chain CPI. It's why they replaced the consumer price index, the inflation rate, with a chained inflation rate, a slower inflation rate, to move people into higher tax brackets, so that what happens is, as time goes on, your tax brackets increase faster than your income increases. Now, if you're already in the top tax bracket, that doesn't matter to you. So anybody who makes over $400,000 a year, this is irrelevant. But people who make under $400,000 a year over the next decade and a half are going to discover that every year their taxes are going up a little more than they should have because of the chain CPI.
But one other thing, at least last night I was watching the PBS NewsHour, and they had an actual scientist that came on, and he actually had a serious discussion about how climate change is affecting these storms, and as we speak, the wildfires are still burning, and I don't know where they think that they're going to get the funding to, alleviate some of the problems that these disasters are going to be causing in the future.
I think that at the federal level, the Republicans are looking at things like the fires in California and going, oh boy, California, the Democratic state, gets to deal with another crisis. Yeah, I
well,
don't.
It was good. Anyways, it was good to see somebody at least come out and talk about it. It ain't the corporate news, but and I understand PBS is, kind of tied into some of the big corporations too. But at least they were able to talk about it. So
yeah. Well, the tax scam, the spending bill, the dealing with disasters. I mean, look at what they did in this tax bill to Puerto Rico. They just they went out of their way to specifically designate Puerto Rico, which is a U.S. protectorate. It's a U.S. territory. All of its citizens, Puerto Ricans, are U.S. citizens. They hold U.S. passports. Yeah. If they come to the continental United States and establish local residency, they can vote in elections. They can vote in primaries down in Puerto Rico. And now you got the governor of Puerto Rico saying we're reaching out to the Puerto Rican diaspora, all the Puerto Ricans who they and their families have left and resettled all around the United States, and saying take down the Republican Party, because they specifically wrote into this tax bill a 12.5% tariff on things imported from Puerto Rico. It's like saying we're going to say that anything manufactured in Florida, if it's sold anywhere in the United States, the rest of the United States has 12.5% automatic tax on it. It would kill Florida's economy. This is what it's like. The Republicans are trying to trash Puerto Rico. Oh my God, people who have a little more pigment in their skin and they speak Spanish. We can't have that. Dave, thanks for the call. It's pretty grim. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Phil in Greeley, Colorado. Hey, Phil, what's on your mind today?
Certainly a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you, Phil. What's up? Phil, your phone is falling apart. I'm going to put you on hold here. Arthur, Phil is on line 8. Maybe you can, maybe he needs to be in a different position or something. Linda in Auburn, Washington. Hey, Linda, what's on your mind today?
Hi.
Hi, Linda.
Thanks for taking my call. I've listened to you since 1090 a.m. Progressive Talk Radio.
Mm-hmm.
This is the first time I've called in or got through. And earlier you made a comment about the president not being very intelligent, and I just wanted to say that in my opinion, it is possible that he is connecting with dark spiritual forces that could be intelligent. And so, I just want to encourage you to consider the possibility that, that can be a play. And in the Bible, it says, God says he especially hates pridefulness and lying. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, that's part of that whole possibility. Then
I'm not sure how I feel about, the manifest existence of evil in the world, independent from an individual human being. In other words, some negative spiritual force, whether you call it, demonic or Satan or whatever. I haven't really reconciled that in my own head. The reality or non-reality of it. Are we imagining it or is it real? But if
we look at the ghost hunter shows, they'll show you where they go, even looking at Aztec cultures, ancient ruins, and they get actual, maybe physically hurt.
I'm familiar with what you're talking about, and I think most of us have had paranormal experiences that cause us to question what we can think of as conventional reality. But where I was going with that, Linda, is if there was ever a person who you could look at and say, yeah, that guy made a deal with the devil to get where he is, I think, Donald Trump would be very, very high up on that list. Linda, I've got to move along, but thank you for the call. Interesting question. Is Trump possessed, or did Trump welcome that? Is that what's going on? I don't know. John in San Francisco. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Happy Winter Solstice to you.
Thank you. Back at you, John.
Thanks. I moved away from CNN a few years back after Turner sold it. But I rediscovered it recently because Trump is so against it. And there's a woman on there who comes on the Don Lemon show whose name is Simone Sanders. And I don't know if she's progressive.
Simone Sanders was Bernie Sanders' press secretary.
That's right.
And she's not related to him, but she was his press secretary.
But she she is so on. Last night she was just didn't miss a beat. She beat up Stephen Morrison, no time flat.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. But what Richard Wolff was discussing is what I called about a week ago when Mark Pocan was on, and that's the messaging of the Democrats and how disappointed he was, in his an hour ago when he was on. And that's exactly where I'm at. I totally echo his thoughts about that, because the messaging is really, really underwhelming and weak. And we need to move into a much more disciplined message. Basically take a flyer from the Republicans on how they message and one-up them and do it every day. Stand on the Capitol steps every day with a couple of new Congress people, preferably opposite sex, and discuss the workings of the day and have it at the same time, maybe 6 o'clock, so it makes the evening news. But every single day, get out there, get there in the Capitol working, and put the message out.
They are doing that, John. As a member of the press, I every single day get multiple press releases, and some of the senators and members of Congress are real good about this. I get stuff from Chuck Schumer every day. I get stuff from Debbie Stabenow several times a week. I get, there's a bunch of senators and members of Raul Grijalva, Mark Pocan, the Congressional Progressive Caucus. They're constantly holding press conferences. They're constantly doing these things. So number one, we have to acknowledge that the Democratic Party has been trying to message this, and individual Democratic members of Congress have enthusiastically been trying to message this, and the corporate media by and large ignores them. And because what they need for their Sunday shows are, Republicans who are aligned with big advertisers for television. So there's that. But on the other hand, to perhaps join your criticism of the Democratic Party, as much as I am not a fan of circular firing squads, I would love to see the Democratic Party start engaging in more guerrilla theater, political theater, where for example, they could have had, some fat cat in a limousine pull up to the Capitol building while the vote was going on, or just after the vote. And if all the Democrats went out with a giant money bag with a dollar sign on it and started piling them on the top of the car or something, or in the trunk of the limousine. I mean, there are things they could be doing, that they need to be doing, that here's the, and John, I'm going to drop your call and just riff on this if I may, but thank you for the call and thanks for getting me started on this. And I was having this conversation with Scott Carter when he was visiting yesterday, the day before yesterday, and I'm not sure if it migrated to on the air or not. I don't remember if I said this on the air, but I think it's an important point. I was, and in fact, I think I said it yesterday, but briefly, I want to amplify on it. I was with a group of progressive radio people in the early 2000s in a meeting in the Senate office building with a bunch of well-known progressive Democratic senators. And I said words to the effect of, we need to figure out more effective communication strategies, and we need to be working towards something like the right wing has with the right-wing echo chamber. And the response I got from one member of the United States Senate was, we don't need to do that. We have the truth on our side. Republicans have to do all this messaging stuff, the whole Fox News thing, because they're always lying. And so they have to have something to make their lies believable. We have the truth on our side. Hang on just a second here.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And what we have tragically learned in the 10 years or so since then is that having the truth on your side is not enough. You still have to get the damn message out.
Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Crisis Without End. This is a collection of essays about nuclear power compiled by Helen Caldicott and edited by Helen Caldicott. I'm reading from the introduction which she wrote. She is the world-famous Australian pediatrician, physician who has been speaking out about nuclear power and whatnot for years and years. On March 11, 2011, an earthquake measuring 9 on the Richter scale struck off the east coast of Japan. Within days, the ensuing tsunami had induced the meltdown of 3 of the 6 nuclear reactors at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. During the earthquake, the external power supply was lost to the reactor complex. The pumps that circulate up to 1 million gallons of water per minute to cool each reactor core ceased to function. Emergency diesel generators situated below the plants kicked in, but these were soon swamped by the tsunami. Without cooling, the radioactive cores in units 1, 2, and 3 began to melt within hours. Over the next few days, all 3 cores, each weighing up to 100 tons, melted their way through 6 inches of steel at the bottom of their reactor vessels and oozed their way onto the concrete floor of the containment buildings, a fact that the Japanese government and Tokyo Electric Power Company, TEPCO, the power plant operator, continued to deny for months after the disaster. At the same time, the zirconium cladding covering thousands of uranium fuel rods reacted with water to create hydrogen, which initiated hydrogen explosions in units 1, 2, 3, and 4. Massive quantities of radiation escaped into the air and water, 3 times more noble gases, argon, xenon, and krypton, than at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant accident in 1986, and huge amounts of other volatile and non-volatile radioactive elements, including cesium, tritium, iodine, strontium, silver, plutonium, americium, and rubidium. Fukushima is now described as the greatest industrial accident in history. The Japanese government considered plans to evacuate 35 million people from Tokyo as other reactors, including 4 at Fukushima Daini, several miles along the coast from Fukushima Daiichi, were also at risk. Meanwhile, thousands of people fled the area around the smoldering reactors, but they were not notified when the radioactive plumes were traveling, despite the fact that there was a system in place to track the plumes. As a result, people fled directly into regions with the highest radiation concentrations, where they were exposed to high levels of whole-body external gamma radiation, inhaling radioactive air, and swallowing radioactive elements. Administering inert potassium iodide to the exposed people would have blocked the uptake of radioactive iodine in the thyroid glands. Unfortunately, it was not supplied except in the town of Miharu, where there was a conscientious mayor. Prophylactic iodine was, however, distributed to the staff of Fukushima Medical University in the days following the accident, after extremely high levels of radioactive iodine, 1.9 million becquerels per kilogram, were discovered in leafy vegetables near the university. Iodine contamination was already widespread in leafy vegetables and milk, while other isotopic contamination from substances such as cesium was widespread in vegetables, fruit, meat, milk, rice, and tea in many areas of Japan. Fukushima disaster is not over and will not end for many millennia. The radioactive fallout, which has covered vast swaths of Japan, will remain toxic for hundreds of thousands of years. It cannot simply be cleaned up, and it will continue to contaminate food, humans, and animals. It is unlikely that the 3 Fukushima Daiichi reactors that experienced total meltdowns will ever be deassembled or decommissioned. TEPCO claims such a massive undertaking will take them at least 30 to 40 years. The International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, predicts that it will be more than 40 years before any progress can be made because of the dangerous levels of radioactivity at the damaged reactors. This accident is identical to the Chernobyl catastrophe in its medical implications. The Fukushima meltdowns will induce an epidemic of cancer as people ingest radioactive elements. The single meltdown and explosion at Chernobyl contaminated 40% of the European landmass. Already, according to a 2009 report published by the New York Academy of Sciences, over 1 million people have perished as a result directly of that catastrophe. Large parts of Europe will remain radioactive for hundreds of years, as will now be the case in Japan. In assessing the impact of the Fukushima disaster on Japan and on the planet, and in assessing the safety of nuclear power overall, it is imperative to understand and evaluate the biological and medical consequences of exposure to the kinds of radioactive elements that were released during an accident at a nuclear power plant. Fact 1, no dose of radiation is safe. Each dose received by the body is cumulative and adds to the risk of developing malignancy or genetic disease. Fact 2, children are 10 to 20 times more vulnerable to the carcinogenic effects of radiation than adults. Females tend to be more sensitive than males, while fetuses and immunocompromised patients are also extremely sensitive. Fact 3, high doses of radiation received from a nuclear meltdown or from weapons explosions can cause acute radiation sickness, including hair loss, severe nausea, diarrhea, and bleeding. Reports of these illnesses, particularly among children, appeared within the first few months after the Fukushima accident. And then it goes on, you know, the types of ionizing radiation. Crisis Without End by Helen Keller.
They're commercial free, and you can listen anytime, any place you want.
There's a great quote from John Adams, who was not the most egalitarian of presidents, but he wrote, "Government is instituted for the common good, for the protection, safety, prosperity, and happiness of the people, and not for the profit, honor, or private interest of any one man, family, or class of men." Interesting. It's John Adams. Dennis in Holt, Michigan. Hey, Dennis, what's on your mind today?
Well, I got a really good one for you. Do you remember the the history of the Italian peninsula back? I think it was in the 1600s when Florence was popular, and they were known for their banking and how they went about doing business. And really, if you think about that, they actually didn't sell anything. What they did is they shipped things, right, and they took products in, and they used that to actually create wealth.
Right, they did it the same way Hong Kong did, by being a transshipment point with very low tariffs.
Exactly. Well, here's what happens, is that if you base your total, your total revenues that your country produces on banking, right? Basically what they're doing is shifting money from the poor to the rich, and pretty soon you've got yourself 1,000, let's just say 500 families. Well, when do you think that the 500 families would like to become 200 families? You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Actually, I don't.
And then pretty soon, the 200 families decide, well, maybe we should whittle this down to 100.
Oh, I see what you're saying. You're talking about the increasing concentration of wealth in a smaller and smaller number of hands.
Right. And pretty soon, the Koch brothers are looking over their shoulder, right?
Yeah.
And what happens when that happens? Well, I can tell you what's going to happen is, at the end of all the counting and everything else, who do you think is going to have the power in this country to make the final decisions? It's going to be the military. And what I think is this. I think what's going to happen is that the soldiers are going to be the ones to decide. And right now, who would you say they would work for, the Koch brothers or the American people?
Wow. Given that so many of our, it brings up a whole bunch of thoughts all at once. Number one, a military coup is something that I think the founders were pretty sure that they were trying to, this is the whole point of the Second Amendment, or one of the major points of the Second Amendment, was this debate, this argument that Jefferson and Madison and the anti-federalist faction made in the late 1700s and even the early 1800s, that we should not have a standing army during time of war because of the danger of a military coup. And that's why they wanted us to have, like Switzerland does, rather than a standing army. I mean, Switzerland has one, but it's small. But rather than a large standing army, they wanted us to have local militias that could be called up during time of crisis or invasion. And the remnant of that today is the National Guard.
Hang on, let me just say this. Right now, the cities are loaded with stormtroopers, and you can say what you want, but those police officers are right-wing types of people.
By and large, yes.
And our they not a force for that purpose? And I don't care what city you're talking about. You can go from Los Angeles to New York, and the way that you get rid of them is you cut off their legs, which is their union. And that's what the people should do right now. And that's the first thing I would do if I was in New York. I'd cut their legs out from under them. I'd say, hey, listen, we got to get rid of unions. By the way, that's what they say. I mean, that's what the Koch brothers say. That's what the right wing says. And then put them out. And they're making $150,000 for killing people.
Yeah, they're never going to go after.
They don't care.
Yeah, they're not going to go after the police unions, Dennis. Number one. And number two, I think police officers, just like everybody else, should have the right to union representation. But number three, I don't disagree that the police unions have negotiated contracts with the cities and counties and states for whom those police work that gives the individual police officers, when they've committed crimes, far more latitude than far more due process than the rest of us get when we've committed crimes, and I think that needs to be fixed.
Have you seen one of them ever get picked up and prosecuted in New York?
No, it's extremely rare, and for the reasons that you're outlining, and like I said, I don't disagree with that. That's something that should be addressed, but let's not do it in the context, Dennis, and thank you for the call. Let's not do it in the context of trashing unions. Let's be very clear. But back to your original point of, do we have to fear the possibility of a police state? Authoritarian-minded people, the people that John Dean wrote about in his book Conservatives Without Conscience. Authoritarian, there's a small number of authoritarian leaders. There's a large number of authoritarian followers, and most of the people who voluntarily and enthusiastically become police officers or members of the military are authoritarian followers. Not all of them, certainly not all of them, but probably well over half. And if you look at the history of other countries, when authoritarian regimes came to power, whether it was Mussolini in Italy, Hitler in Germany, Franco in Spain, look at all the countries in Central and South America, the history that we see over and over and over again is that when an authoritarian leader comes to power, the structures of power and authority within the country, which are principally the military and the police, and secondarily the court systems, which Donald Trump is right now, as Mike Papantonio just pointed out, 650 federal judges. He's fixing to completely reinvent the entire federal judiciary. Those institutions, being inclined toward authoritarianism to begin with, become more authoritarian. So the most enthusiastic people at rooting out the Jews in Germany, the most enthusiastic people at finding the communists in Spain, the most enthusiastic people at finding the trade unionists in Italy and utterly destroying them during the 1930s were the police, with great enthusiasm. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't have police. I'm not saying that, the police, the whole thing needs to be changed. But if you look at the police, number one, and the military, number two, if you look at the military during the Vietnam era, when we had a draft, or during World War II when we had a draft, our military represented a broad cross-section of Americans. And so the percentage of authoritarian followers was probably about the same percentage as it is in the general population as a whole, which is around 20%. I would argue that, and in our police departments, a lot of police departments, it was just a good job. Even New York, particularly New York City, hey, they've got a strong union. You can make $100,000 a year if you work some overtime. It's a good job, good benefits, 20 years and you're out with a pension. It doesn't get better than that. So in those kind of environments, you end up with police officers who represent the broad spectrum of America. But when you start paying really poorly, as many of our police departments do, and when you lower the standards for entry, as many of our police departments have done because they're paying poorly, because Reaganism has just kneecapped the ability of towns and counties and cities to have enough money to pay for municipal services like police and fire. As your standards and your pay drops, more and more the people who enthusiastically sign up to be police officers are not, it's no longer people who are looking for a good pay and a pension. It's now people who are looking for the ability to pull out their billy club or their gun and beat the crap out of or kill whoever they want, whenever they want. In other words, the authoritarians. So this is one of the reasons why I've been saying for years and years and years, with regard to the military, we need to bring back the draft. There needs to be a non-military option for conscientious objectors, for people who are not fans of being part of the military, so that they can work in a hospital or a school or something like that. But everybody takes 1 year after high school and either goes into the military or does public service. It's a rite of passage, something that we have lost and are lacking in our culture. It would be a good thing psychologically and culturally for people. And with regard to our police, we need to start paying, just like police and teachers. My old shtick, I've been saying this for decades. Our teachers hold our future in their hands. Our police hold the quality of life of our present in their hands. And we dump on both of them. We don't pay teachers well, and we don't give them respect. And in most parts of the country, we don't pay cops well, and we don't give them respect. We don't hold them to high standards. And both of those things need to change. And as I said, our military. And until we look at these things, these systemic things, and say, you know, this is actually a threat to democracy, that our military is being filled up with people who are authoritarians, that our police departments are being filled up with people who are authoritarians, so that just laying the ground, seeding the ground, or fertilizing the ground, so that when an authoritarian leader like Donald Trump comes along, everybody's going to snap into line. We have seen this happen in country after country after country. And it would be a terrible, terrible thing if it happened here. We need to be awake to these possibilities. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of the news of the day, your calls and my thoughts on all of the above right after this. Welcome back. Michael, watching Free Speech TV in Brookline, Mass. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I want to talk about the tax scam and the theft, but I want to point out that the federal debt is a very complicated thing, and this gloom and doom is unwarranted. And the reason is because of the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve has the power to buy up as much of the debt as you want and just create money out of thin air.
And the Treasury Department has the ability to do that by issuing trillion-dollar platinum coins.
Yeah, okay, but the Fed routinely does this with bonds. And
yes.
In fact, in 2008, their asset base went from $800 billion to pretty soon to $3, $4, and now $4.5 trillion of assets.
That's right, by buying up bonds. Well, they were also buying, bad mortgages and bad derivatives. So they were taking the so-called toxic assets off the books of the banks.
But let's say the federal debt burden gets too high.
Mm-hmm.
The Federal Reserve buys up the treasuries. They issue money to people.
Right.
Now, that'll drive down the interest rates. And then...
That's what they did with quantitative easing, Michael.
What?
That is exactly what they did with quantitative easing.
Right. And the point is that now the income, the Fed is quasi-governmental agency, so now the income gets transferred to the Treasury. So in effect, if they bought up all the debt, I'm not saying they will, but if they did, there would be no debt burden at all because the Treasury would pay the Fed and the Fed would pay the Treasury.
Right.
So the thing is that all of this gloom and doom is that this is a scam and a throwaway from the middle class to the upper class. If it were, in fact, true, $1.5 trillion of true investment, education, roads, infrastructure, solar power across the country, $1.5 trillion in 10 years is not such a big deal. It's a good thing.
Right.
Because the investment would pay itself back many times.
Right, but it's not that, Michael. That is not what they are spending this money on. What they're spending this money on is share buybacks and tax cuts to billionaires.
Right, theft, in short. I mean, give from the poor, take from the poor and give to the rich. That's what it is.
That's what's going on. This is the absolute reverse of Robin Hood.
Right.
So the question then becomes, what do we do about that?
Well, the only thing we can do is, I think, is put in a Democratic Congress and a Democratic president and reverse this crap. You know, raise the tax. You know, even Steve Bannon, who is obnoxious, wanted to raise rates on the upper brackets and lower them on the working class people. That got lost, okay? But the point is that this program is just, you know,
oh, it's crazy. Another thing, did the 10%, I'm pretty sure that the 10% bottom rate stayed in there. And right now it's 12%, which means that the poorest working poor just got a tax increase.
Yeah, right. It's absolutely absurd.
I mean, it's somewhere between absurd and obscene. I mean, this scam that is being perpetrated on the American people, and these guys are all patting themselves in the back, and all over America, people who watch Fox News are going, "Hey, wonderful stuff! You know, someday I'll get my money too."
It's too bad they're not like monthly elections, because these guys would be out on the street.
Yeah, amen. Amen.
You know?
Yep. Michael, thanks for the call, and thanks for watching us there in Brookline, Mass. We'll be back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Just to add to that previous rant about our police and our law enforcement and military, there has been a concerted effort for decades on the part of the white supremacist movement to also infiltrate our military and to infiltrate our police departments. And fundamentalist Christians, I mean, they took over the Air Force Academy. Remember Mikey Weinstein wrote the book about that after his son got harassed as a Jew in the Air Force Academy out in Colorado. I mean, this has been happening for many, many years, and these are natural aggregation points for authoritarian followers, and natural places for authoritarian leaders to exploit. Donald Trump constantly calling out the police and saying how wonderful they are, for example. And it's just like, be aware, be awake. Howard in Coriopolis, Pennsylvania. Hey, Howard, what's on your mind?
I got to ask you an opinion. Trump's going to sign the bill after the first of the year, which means that the 4% on Medicare doesn't happen until 2019.
Correct.
Also, if I recall, Trump said that the tax cuts start immediately at the beginning of 2018.
That's right. You get the benefit. You get the sugar high in 2018, just in time for the November elections, and then the pain comes in January 2019.
Is for them to manipulate the election in 2018 in favor of them.
Of course, and then you get the pain in January of 2019, and you've got a whole year and 11/12 until the next election for people to forget that that's what happened, which, memories are short, and the Republicans know this.
What can we do about that?
Raise holy hell, tell everybody you know, and show up at your local Democratic Party and take a leadership role in what's going on in Coriopolis, Pennsylvania, Howard. That's my advice. We need to be participating in this stuff.
Okay, Tom, and I would hope that you push that yourself.
I will continue to. Howard, thank you very much for the call. It's great to hear from you. Scott in Canaan, Maine. Hey, Scott, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how are you?
I'm well. What's up?
Once again, I have to approach this from a common sense thing because I'm not educated like you. But with this tax money that I'll be saving, which is a couple dollars a week, I guess, I can afford a jar of Vaseline, so the next time they come, it won't hurt so bad. And
ouch!
I needed to ask you about the God, I was just listening to this other fellow, but I wanted to piggyback on the other earlier caller that was talking about shutting the government down. I understand that a lot of people, myself included, would be hurt by that, but it's going to end up happening anyways. I mean, in my opinion, the dollar is getting ready to fall. The only reason it's up where it's at is because we flooded the world with dollars.
Yeah.
And it's due to crash. I think you're right when you were talking about it. And in your other book, it just maybe get here a year late. But it's going to happen anyway. So why can't we just take the hit now and get it over with and have a people's revolt? And while we're doing that, what would happen if we changed to a democracy instead of a corrupt representative republic like we are now, under the guise of democracy?
Yeah, if you're talking direct democracy, where all this...
The GOP's corrupted. I mean, it's a mess. It's corrupted. The courts are corrupted. They're bought out by corporations. And I can't see any way out of this, to be honest with you. And
oh, there's a very simple way out of it, Scott, and that is to ban money in politics, and which most of the countries of the developed world have already done. The barrier to that is the Supreme Court, which has said that money in politics is a guaranteed right under the First Amendment. I doubt that any of the authors of the First Amendment would agree with that, or most of them, I doubt, would agree with that. But that's what we've got. And so if we passed a constitutional amendment tomorrow saying that political money is not free speech and corporations are not persons, then both Democrats and I would submit to you a majority of Republicans would go back to the kind of legislation that was passed by a majority of Democrats and a majority of Republicans in 1973 at the tail end of the Nixon scandals. They passed some really, really radical and comprehensive campaign finance laws that made it illegal for anybody to give more than $2,400 to anybody running for political office or their campaign or anything else. And that was struck down in 1976 by the Supreme Court in a decision called Buckley versus Vallejo. Had that not been struck down, the whole phenomena of the Tea Party and the Koch network and these billionaires who own the Republican Party never could have happened. And we could reverse much of that. Because, the Republican lawmakers that I got to know when I was in Washington, D.C., and the few that would talk to me would never come on my show. But the Republicans that I got to know, just like the Democrats that I got to know, were equally horrified by the fact that as an elected official, they had to spend 3, 4, 5 hours a day on the telephone in a private office building begging for money every single day, 5, 6, 7 days a week in some cases. They're horrified by it, Republicans and Democrats. So if we could overcome the Supreme Court through this constitutional amendment, then you're going to find both parties jumping on this. And then the whole tax scam stuff would go away. All this legislating for dollars, pretty much everything that the Republicans are up to and some of the stuff that the Democrats have been doing has been pushed by special interest groups, by what James Madison referred to as factions in Federalist Number 10. Groups that are more interested in their own benefit and willing to pursue that to the detriment of their nation. And we've got to get that under control. We've got to get that under control. And the only way to do that is to get money out of politics. And that means going to a national system where we are all subsidizing political dialogues, where we have some limits on politics in the press. Limits is the wrong word. But anyhow, there's so many steps that can be taken. Thanks so much for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow. And in the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us. It requires you, me, everybody. We have to get active and involved. Get out there, get active, tag. You're it. See you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com.